Hey friends, around 70% of viewers who watch my videos haven't subscribed yet. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. It would truly mean a lot to me. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps the videos reach more people and really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much. Let me know in the comments which city or country are you watching from. I set out early in the morning, just as the sun was beginning to push light through the thick trees. The air was cool and fresh, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. I had no specific destination in mind, just a trail I had heard about from a local hiking blog. It was supposed to be a quiet path, not crowded with tourists, winding through the woods and up to a ridge where you could see for miles. The ground beneath my boots was soft from a recent rain. Every step made a faint squish as the soil gave way. The trail was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, bordered by tall ferns and clusters of wildflowers with delicate white and yellow petals. Birds called to each other from high branches, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the steady rush of a small stream. The first part of the hike was gentle, a slow climb with little incline. I moved at a steady pace, careful not to slip on the damp leaves and roots that crossed the path. The forest was dense, the canopy above filtering the sunlight into soft patches on the ground. As I walked, I noticed small things. A spider weaving its web between two branches, a line of ants carrying bits of leaves back to their nest, the subtle shift in the smell of the air when I passed a patch of wild mint. After about an hour, the trail began to climb more steeply. The trees thinned out, replaced by low shrubs and patches of exposed rock. I stopped to catch my breath and looked back down the slope. The forest stretched out in all directions, a sea of green that seemed to go on forever. The wind picked up here, cool and steady, brushing over my face and rustling the leaves. I kept going, the ground growing rougher with loose stones and roots tangled like snakes. My legs burned from the effort, but I welcomed the challenge. Reaching the ridge was the goal. I imagined the view from the top, how the valley below would open wide and the sky would stretch endlessly above. As I climbed higher, the sunlight grew warmer. I could see patches of blue sky through the branches now, and clouds drifting slowly. Somewhere nearby, a woodpecker tapped against a tree, its rhythm steady and sharp. The sound helped me keep my pace, steady and strong. Near the top, the trail flattened out, and I found myself in a clearing. The trees stood back here, giving space to wild grass and scattered rocks. The wind was stronger, sweeping over the open ground with a soft whistle. I dropped my pack and sat on a large stone to rest. From this spot, the view was breathtaking. The valley below was a patchwork of fields and forest, rivers threading through like silver ribbons. The mountains in the distance rose sharp and blue against the sky, their peaks capped with the last traces of winter snow. The air was clear, and the sunlight warmed my skin as I sat quietly, taking it all in. I stayed there for a while, drinking water and eating some trail mix. The quiet was deep, broken only by the wind and the occasional bird. It was the kind of silence that feels full, not empty, like the world has paused just for a moment. I felt calm, connected to something simple and real. After resting, I packed up and began the descent. The way down was slower because I had to be careful not to slip on the loose rocks and wet leaves. My legs were tired now, and every step required focus. The forest felt different on the way back, the light shifting as the sun moved lower. Shadows grew longer and the air cooled again. I noticed details I had missed before: the shape of a leaf, the smooth curve of a stone, the way the light made the bark on the trees look rough and textured. I saw a small rabbit dart across the trail and disappear into the bushes. The stream I had heard earlier was clearer now, its water running bright over the stones. As I neared the end of the trail, the forest thickened again. The path became softer underfoot, and the sound of the stream followed me like a guide. Finally, I reached the parking area where I had left my car. The sun was low in the sky, casting golden light over the trees and the empty lot. I felt tired but good. The hike had been hard in places, but it was worth it. The quiet of the forest, the fresh air, the wide view from the ridge. It all stayed with me. There was no rush here, no distractions, just the steady rhythm of walking and breathing and being outside. I loaded my pack into the trunk and sat in the car for a moment before starting the engine. The heater warmed the cool air inside, and I thought about the trail behind me, how the forest had felt alive and still all at once, how the small details made the whole day rich and full. Driving away, I looked back once at the dark line of trees against the fading light. The day was ending, but the feeling stayed, the calm, the quiet, and the deep satisfaction of a day spent on my own in the wild. The hike was simple, but it reminded me of something important. How being outside, moving through the world on foot, can clear the mind and open the heart. No stories or legends were needed, just the earth beneath my feet, the sky above, and the quiet pulse of nature all around me. That was enough. I set out early in the morning, the sun barely up and the air crisp and cool. The trailhead was quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. My pack felt heavier than usual, loaded with extra water, food, and gear. The plan was simple. A solo hike through a section of forest I had never explored before, a place marked on the map only as a cluster of dense woods and rough terrain. I was ready for the challenge, eager to lose myself in the natural world for a day. The path started well enough. It was narrow but clear, lined by tall pines and oaks whose branches swayed gently in the light breeze. The ground beneath was soft with a thick layer of fallen leaves and pine needles. Early on, the trail curved alongside a small creek, its water clear and cold, trickling quietly over smooth stones. I stopped to fill my water bottle, kneeling by the bank and watching small fish dart through the shallow pools. The smell of damp earth mixed with pine filled the air, grounding me in the moment. As I moved deeper into the woods, the trail grew rougher. Roots twisted across the path like old ropes, and rocks jutted out in uneven clusters. My boots crunched and slipped occasionally on loose gravel, demanding my full attention to avoid tripping. The forest thickened, and the sunlight filtering through the canopy created a patchwork of light and shadow on the ground. Every now and then, I spotted signs of wildlife, broken twigs, fresh tracks, and the distant call of a hawk soaring high above. After a couple of hours, I reached a small clearing. It was a quiet spot, encircled by tall trees, and in the center was a large flat rock bathed in sunlight. I sat down to rest and pulled out a snack from my pack, some trail mix and an apple. The silence around me was complete except for the occasional buzz of insects and the whisper of leaves in the breeze. I took my time, savoring the peacefulness that felt so rare in everyday life. When I got up to continue, I noticed the trail markers. They were simple painted blazes on tree trunks, easy to miss if you weren't paying close attention. I followed them carefully, winding along the hillside and crossing a narrow wooden bridge over a trickling stream. The wood creaked beneath my feet, worn smooth by years of hikers. On the other side, the trail climbed steeply, the incline making my legs burn with effort. Sweat began to bead on my forehead, and I paused to adjust my pack straps. As the afternoon wore on, the forest changed. The trees became sparser, and the ground turned rockier and more uneven. I could hear the wind picking up, rustling through the branches with a harsher sound. A faint sense of unease crept in as I realized the path ahead wasn't as clear as before. The markers were fewer, and some looked faded or partially covered by moss. I slowed my pace, scanning carefully for the next blaze. At one point, I came across a fork in the trail. Both paths looked worn and used. One curved sharply to the right, heading down into a shadowed ravine, while the other led left up a steep ridge. I checked my map and compass, but the dense canopy made it hard to get a clear view of my position. I decided to take the ridge path, reasoning it might offer a better vantage point to figure out where I was. The climb was steep and tiring. My boots slipped occasionally on loose stones, and I had to stop several times to catch my breath. When I finally reached the top, the forest opened up into a small plateau with a partial view of the surrounding area. I could see more trees stretching out in all directions, with a faint outline of distant hills against the sky. The sun was lowering, casting a warm orange glow across the landscape. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but there was no signal. My heart sank slightly. I had been careful with my supplies and navigation, but now I realized I was deeper into the forest than I thought. The fading light meant I needed to decide whether to push on or turn back. I looked around and spotted another trail marker nearby, faint but visible. It seemed to head downhill, toward the direction I had come from. I chose to follow it, hoping it would lead back to the main trail. The descent was tricky. Loose gravel and roots made footing uncertain, and my legs trembled with the effort to stay balanced. As the trees thickened again, the light dimmed quickly. I slowed down even more, careful not to lose my way in the growing shadows. After what felt like an hour, I heard the sound of running water again. The creek from earlier, maybe. Relief flooded over me. I moved toward the sound, steadying myself with my trekking poles as I navigated through a tangle of bushes and low branches. Soon, I was back on the familiar path alongside the creek. I recognized the curve in the trail and the old fallen log I had passed that morning. The sun was almost gone now, and the forest was cloaked in twilight. I quickened my steps, eager to reach the trailhead before dark. The woods around me felt calm but alert, alive with the sounds of night creatures stirring. I kept my headlamp ready, though I hoped not to need it. Finally, the trees thinned, and I caught sight of the clearing where my car was parked. I broke into a run, heart pounding with relief and exhaustion. When I reached the edge of the parking lot, I dropped my pack and sat on the ground, catching my breath. The sky was a deep blue, and stars were beginning to twinkle above. I stood and walked over to my car, keys trembling in my hand. I pressed the remote button, and the lights blinked back. I opened the door, slid inside, and locked it behind me. The heater warmed the chilly air inside the cabin, and I leaned back, letting the day's tension drain away. The hike had tested me more than I expected. The forest had seemed friendly at first, then confusing and unforgiving. I realized how easy it was to lose track in the wilderness and how important it was to stay alert and prepared. But I also felt proud. Proud that I had trusted my instincts, stayed calm, and found my way back safely. Driving home, I thought about the quiet strength of the forest, how it demanded respect and patience. I knew I would return, better prepared and ready for whatever came next. This trip was more than just a hike. It was a reminder of my limits and my ability to overcome them, and that, in the end, made it worth every step. The morning air was cold and fresh when I set out on the trail. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale light through the thin branches of the trees. The forest was quiet except for the crunch of my boots on the dirt path. I had no particular destination in mind, just the urge to walk and feel the calm that comes with being surrounded by nature. The sky was clear, with only a few scattered clouds, promising good weather for the day. The trail was narrow and winding. On both sides, tall pines and oaks stood closely together, their leaves and needles forming a thick canopy overhead. Light filtered through the branches in scattered patches, making the ground look like a mix of dark shadows and bright spots. The smell of pine and earth filled my nose as I moved steadily forward. My backpack was light but sturdy, holding only the essentials: a water bottle, some snacks, a map, and a first aid kit. I had packed a light jacket, but the coolness of the air kept me comfortable without needing it just yet. After about an hour of steady walking, the trail began to rise gently. The trees grew thinner, and the forest floor became rocky, dotted with moss and small plants. I noticed the sound of a stream nearby, the rush of water moving over stones. Following the sound, I came to a small creek crossing the path. The water was clear and cold, running quickly between smooth rocks. I stopped to fill my water bottle and took a moment to watch the water flow. It felt peaceful, almost like the world had slowed down around me. Continuing up the trail, the trees opened more, and the landscape changed. I was moving into higher ground now, where the forest thinned and patches of grass and wildflowers appeared. The sun was higher in the sky, warming my face and arms. I stopped to eat some nuts and dried fruit from my pack. The trail was still quiet, only the occasional chirp of birds breaking the silence. I felt alone, but in a good way, like I was the only person who mattered for the moment. The path became steeper and more challenging. Rocks jutted out from the soil, and the incline made my legs burn with effort. I paused a few times to catch my breath and take in the view. From this height, I could see the tops of the trees I had passed below, the forest stretching out in every direction. It was a sea of green, with small patches of brown and gray where rocks and dirt showed through. The sky above was bright blue, a perfect contrast to the land below. Near the top of the hill, the trail leveled out again and led to a clearing. This was the kind of place hikers dream about. The clearing was open and sunny, filled with tall grasses and wildflowers waving gently in the breeze. In the center stood a large, flat rock that looked like it had been placed there by nature just for resting. I sat down, glad for the break. The warmth of the sun on my skin felt good after the hard climb. While sitting, I looked out over the valley below. The forest stretched far and wide, broken only by the ribbon of a river snaking through the land. I could see a few small houses far in the distance, tiny specks against the vast green. The view was beautiful and peaceful, and I felt a strong sense of calm and happiness. It was moments like this that made all the effort worthwhile. After a while, I stood up and continued walking. The trail now followed the ridge of the hill, offering more great views but also requiring careful footing. The ground was uneven and rocky, and I had to watch every step to avoid twisting an ankle. The wind picked up here, cool and steady, brushing against my face and carrying the scent of wildflowers. As I walked, I noticed the sky starting to change. Clouds were gathering on the horizon, thick and gray. The temperature dropped slightly, and the wind grew stronger. I kept going, hoping the weather would hold, but I knew it might be time to turn back soon. Before long, I reached the edge of the ridge where the trail began to slope downward. The rocks became loose and the path less clear. I moved carefully, steadying myself with my trekking poles. The clouds had darkened more now, and I could hear the faint rumble of thunder in the distance. The first drops of rain began to fall, light at first but growing heavier quickly. I didn't want to get caught in a storm on this rocky trail, so I picked up my pace. The rain came harder, soaking my jacket and making the rocks slippery. My boots splashed in puddles forming along the path. I focused on the ground, trying not to slip as the rain poured down around me. After what felt like a long and difficult descent, I finally reached the base of the hill. The trees were thicker here, and the rain was less intense under the canopy. I followed the trail back toward where I had started. My clothes were wet, my legs tired, but I felt alive in a way only the outdoors can make you feel. As I walked the last few miles back to my car, the rain slowed and the clouds began to break apart. Rays of late afternoon sun peeked through, drying the wet leaves and sparkling on the drops still clinging to the branches. I arrived at the parking lot just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows and bathing everything in warm golden light. Sitting in my car, I took a deep breath and looked out at the forest behind me. The day had been hard but rewarding. The trail had tested me, the weather had challenged me, and in the end, I had made it through on my own 2 feet. The quiet moments, the fresh air, the stunning views, those were what I would remember most. Packing up my gear, I felt grateful for the chance to get away from everything for a while. Hiking like this reminded me that life is sometimes about moving forward, one step at a time, even when the path is steep and the weather turns against you. It's about pushing through, appreciating the small details, and knowing that when you reach the end, the journey was worth every bit of effort. The morning air was cool and crisp as I stepped onto the trailhead. The forest around me was still waking up, the faint sounds of birds stirring in the branches above. I had planned this hike on a whim, not really sure where I was going beyond the name of the trail printed on the map, Pine Ridge Loop. The day was clear, with no sign of rain or clouds, and I wanted to make the most of it. The path was narrow and dusty, winding gently upward through thick stands of pine and fir trees that filtered the sunlight into scattered golden patches on the ground. At first, the walk was easy, the incline gentle enough that I didn't have to push too hard. The smell of pine needles mixed with the earthy scent of damp soil beneath the trees was fresh and calming. I could hear the crunch of my boots on dry leaves and small twigs, and the occasional chirp of a squirrel or flutter of a bird taking flight nearby. The trail was marked clearly with small, painted blazes on the trees, guiding me through a maze of underbrush and rock. As I walked, the forest began to open up here and there, revealing small clearings dotted with wildflowers. Their colors stood out sharply against the green backdrop, yellow, white, and delicate purple blossoms that swayed lightly in the soft breeze. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath and to soak in the quiet beauty. The sun was higher now, warm on my skin but not hot, and I could feel a pleasant sweat starting on my forehead. The trail grew steeper as I continued, the loose dirt and rocks making my footing less steady. I slowed down to steady myself, planting each foot carefully to avoid slipping. My legs were beginning to tire, the muscles tightening with effort. The trees grew taller and thicker here, the canopy denser, blocking out much of the sunlight. The air smelled cooler and a bit damper. Somewhere up ahead, I could hear the faint trickle of water. After another stretch of uphill walking, the path leveled out, and I came upon a small stream crossing. The water was clear and cold, tumbling over smooth stones in a shallow bed. I took a moment to kneel down and cup the water in my hands, letting it wash over my face and arms. The cold shock revived me, and I took a sip, the fresh taste clean and pure. The sound of the stream was peaceful, and I stood there quietly, listening to the water moving and the wind whispering through the leaves. Beyond the stream, the trail continued to climb, but more gradually now. The forest started to thin, with more open spaces and a better view of the surrounding hills and valleys. I could see the tops of distant mountains, their jagged peaks stretching toward the sky. The landscape was a patchwork of green forests, rocky outcrops, and open meadows. The wind picked up here, stronger and cooler, pushing against my jacket. I felt a swell of satisfaction. The effort to get here was paying off. The path was well worn, and I could see footprints of other hikers who had come before me. It was reassuring, knowing I was not entirely alone in this vast wilderness. Still, the solitude was welcome. I had wanted to get away from the noise and rush of daily life, and this quiet, natural world was exactly what I needed. As I moved forward, I noticed some scattered fallen logs along the trail, their bark peeling and surfaces rough from years of weathering. Some of the logs were covered in moss, soft and green, and small mushrooms clustered at their bases. The trail wound through these remains of old trees like a ribbon, blending with the natural decay that was part of the forest cycle. After a few hours of steady hiking, I reached the summit of the loop. It was a small clearing on top of a ridge, with a rocky outcrop that provided a perfect place to rest. The view was breathtaking. Below me stretched the vast forest, a sea of green that seemed to go on forever. In the distance, mountains rose sharply, their peaks dusted with the last patches of winter snow. The sky was a clear blue canvas, and the sunlight poured over the landscape in a warm, golden light. I sat down on one of the large rocks, taking off my pack and pulling out a bottle of water and a small snack. The quiet was deep here, broken only by the occasional call of a hawk circling above or the rustle of a breeze through the trees. I felt completely at peace, far away from any city noise or distractions. The effort it took to get here, the aches in my legs, and the sweat on my brow all faded away as I soaked in the moment. I stayed there for a while, resting and just looking out over the wild land. The trail had been more challenging than I expected, but the reward was worth it. I felt a connection to something larger, the natural world that moved at its own pace, untouched by hurry or stress. The sun was starting to dip lower now, casting longer shadows and turning the sky soft shades of pink and orange. Knowing I still had to make the full loop back, I packed up and started my descent carefully. The path down was steeper and looser, and I had to watch every step to avoid slipping. My legs were tired, but I felt steady and sure. The forest was changing as the day grew late, the light was fading, and the temperature was dropping. The sounds of the forest grew quieter, the animals settling in for night. I reached the trailhead again as dusk fell. The air was cool and fresh, the smell of pine and earth stronger in the evening calm. My body was tired but satisfied. The hike had been long and sometimes hard, but it had given me something I don't get in everyday life: quiet, space, and a chance to be part of something bigger and slower. I took one last deep breath of the forest air before heading back to my car, feeling refreshed and ready to face whatever came next with a clearer mind and a steadier heart. That day in the forest was a reminder that sometimes the best journeys are the ones where you just move forward, step by step, and let the world unfold around you. No rush, no distractions, just the trail beneath your feet and the sky above. The sun was just rising as I started my hike on a trail I had never been on before. I had decided to pick a random spot on the map the night before, somewhere far from the usual crowded parks. The air was fresh and cool, with a light breeze brushing against my face. The forest around me was thick with tall trees, their leaves whispering softly in the wind. The ground was covered in dry leaves and pine needles, making my boots crunch as I walked deeper into the woods. The trail was narrow and winding, marked by simple wooden signs that looked old but still sturdy. I noticed that the trees here were much older than I expected, their bark rough and thick. Every now and then, small rays of sunlight broke through the canopy above, casting golden patches on the forest floor. The smell of damp earth mixed with pine was strong and calming. I kept a steady pace, carrying only a backpack with water, some snacks, and a basic first aid kit. The path had some uneven parts where roots stuck out like fingers from the ground, and rocks that forced me to watch my step carefully. The quiet around me was only broken by the sound of birds calling and the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. I liked the solitude. It made the hike feel peaceful, even though I stayed alert. After walking for about 2 hours, I reached a small clearing. The space was open, with soft grass and wildflowers growing in clusters. In the middle stood a large, weathered rock that looked like it had been there for centuries. I took a break, sitting on the rock to drink some water and eat a granola bar. From there, I could see part of the valley below, where the trees gave way to fields and a winding river. The view made the effort worth it. Refreshed, I continued on the trail, which started to climb more steeply. My legs felt the strain, but the promise of reaching a high point kept me moving. The trees thinned out, replaced by bushes and patches of grass growing between the rocks. The wind was stronger now, cold against my skin. I could hear the distant sound of the river below getting louder as I climbed higher. As I approached the top of the ridge, the trail disappeared into a rocky area. I carefully picked my way over the stones, using my hands to steady myself. The effort was hard, but the air was clear and the sky wide above me. Finally, I reached the summit just as the sun climbed higher, casting light across the landscape in every direction. From that vantage point, I could see miles of forest stretching out, broken only by rivers and small lakes. The colors of the trees varied from deep green to orange and yellow, signaling the start of fall. The wind was strong but refreshing. I sat down on a flat rock and looked around, feeling small but connected to something bigger. After resting and taking in the view, I checked my watch. I had been hiking for nearly 4 hours. I still had to return, but I wanted to take a different path down. I had seen on the map that there was a loop trail that might be longer but would bring me back to my car without repeating the climb. The descent was harder in some ways. The rocks were slippery from morning dew, and the bushes scratched at my arms as I moved through them. My legs ached from the climb and the uneven ground, but I kept going carefully. The trail went down steeply in some places, winding through narrow gullies and crossing small streams. The sound of water rushing over rocks was a welcome change from the silence of the forest. About halfway down, I noticed a patch of wild raspberries growing beside the trail. I paused to pick a few, the sweet taste refreshing. It was the kind of small reward that made the hike feel even better. The forest around me was dense again, with tall trees and thick undergrowth. I stayed focused on the trail, knowing that getting lost here would be a serious problem. As I neared the bottom, the sun was warm on my back, and the air smelled like grass and earth. I could hear distant sounds of cars and people, a reminder that civilization was close. The trail ended near a small parking area where a few other hikers had left their cars. I felt a sense of relief and accomplishment walking back to mine. I unpacked my gear, feeling tired but happy. The hike had been exactly what I needed. A chance to get away, push myself physically, and connect with nature. I thought about how random this spot had been, chosen without much planning, and how it had turned out to be one of the best hikes I had done in a long time. Driving away, I looked back at the forest edge disappearing behind me. I knew I would come back to this area, maybe explore more trails or revisit the one I had just done. The sense of calm and achievement stayed with me, a reminder that sometimes the best adventures come from taking a chance and stepping into the unknown. The day ended with the sky turning pink and purple as the sun set. I felt grateful for the quiet moments, the challenges, and the beauty I had seen. The hike was more than just exercise. It was a reset for my mind and body, and that was something I knew I could carry with me for a long time. I set out early in the morning, carrying a medium-sized backpack filled with the usual hiking gear, water, snacks, a first aid kit, and a map of the area. The trailhead was quiet, surrounded by tall pines and the soft rustling of leaves in the light breeze. It was late spring, and the forest was waking up. The air smelled fresh with damp earth and pine needles. I had no particular destination in mind, just a plan to follow a random trail that caught my eye on the map and see where it would lead. The first part of the hike was easy. The path was wide and well-trodden, and the sun filtered through the branches in warm patches of light. I kept a steady pace, enjoying the feeling of my feet pressing into the soft dirt, the steady rhythm of the forest sounds around me. Birds called here and there, but otherwise, everything felt calm and untouched. I noticed small details, the bright green moss growing on rocks, tiny flowers tucked into cracks, the way the light changed as the trees grew taller and thicker. After about 2 hours, the trail began to narrow. The packed dirt gave way to loose stones and fallen leaves. The slope grew steeper, and I had to watch my footing carefully. I passed a few clearings where the sun broke through completely, revealing patches of wildflowers and open sky. The air grew cooler and fresher as I climbed higher. I stopped once to drink from my water bottle and take a small snack, a granola bar, while sitting on a smooth boulder. At one point, the trail forked. Both paths looked well used, but one headed steeply uphill and the other seemed to curve more gently through the trees. Without much thought, I took the uphill trail. The path was rougher here, with exposed roots and larger rocks. My legs began to tire, and sweat collected on my forehead. I kept my breath steady and my pace slow but sure. The deeper I went into the forest, the quieter it became. The sound of the wind in the branches was the only thing breaking the silence. About an hour later, I reached a ridge with a view. The trees opened up to reveal rolling hills stretching out under a wide sky. The sun was higher now, bright but not hot, and the breeze felt cool on my skin. I sat down on a fallen log and took out my water bottle again, sipping slowly while taking in the view. The forest stretched far below, dark green and dense, and in the distance, I could see a small lake catching the sunlight. I hadn't expected to come across a view like this on a random trail, and it made me glad I had chosen this path. After resting for a while, I continued along the ridge trail. The path twisted and turned, following the edge of the hill, sometimes close to steep drops covered in thick brush and small trees. I stayed cautious, keeping a safe distance from the edge and stepping carefully where the ground was uneven. The air smelled faintly of pine resin and wildflowers, and occasional birds flew across the sky. Eventually, the trail began to descend. The ground here was softer again, covered in a mix of dirt and pine needles. I noticed signs of animals, tracks in the mud and some broken branches where deer must have passed. The trees grew closer together, and the light dimmed under the thick canopy. I had to slow my pace again to avoid tripping over roots and rocks. As I walked deeper into this part of the forest, I realized I hadn't seen any other hikers for a long time. The silence was different now, almost heavy, but not uncomfortable. Felt like the forest was holding its breath. I stayed alert but not afraid, aware of every sound and movement around me. The sun was starting to lower in the sky, casting long shadows between the trees. I checked my map and noticed that the trail I was on was supposed to circle back toward the main path, but it wasn't clearly marked here. I kept following the worn dirt path, hoping it would lead me back before it got too dark. My legs were tired, but I didn't want to rush and risk slipping. After about an hour of careful walking, I came to a small stream. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones with a quiet, steady sound. I knelt down to fill my water bottle and rested for a moment, dipping my hands in the chilly water. The stream was a good sign. Trails often follow water sources, so I figured I was still on the right track. The sun was now close to the horizon, and the forest was turning a deep shade of green and gold. I packed up and kept moving, following the sound of the stream downstream. The trail was less obvious here, covered in fallen leaves and branches. I had to push aside some bushes and step over logs. My feet were sore, and my backpack felt heavier with every step. Just as the light was fading, I spotted a faint trail marker nailed to a tree. It was a simple wooden sign with a painted arrow pointing to the right. Relief washed over me. I followed the arrow, hoping it would lead me back to the main trailhead before nightfall. The path climbed gently again, and I pushed myself harder despite the weariness. My heart beat faster from both the effort and the worry of being out too late. After about 20 minutes, I saw a clearing through the trees, the parking area where I had left my car. I made my way to the edge of the clearing and stood there for a moment, watching the last light disappear. The sky was painted in soft pinks and purples, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves. I felt a quiet satisfaction. The hike had been tougher than I expected, but I had made it through. There were no surprises, no dangers, just the steady challenge of the forest and the trail. I walked to my car, unlocked it, and sat inside. The seat felt warm after being in the sun all day. I took off my backpack and leaned back, letting out a deep breath. My legs were tired but steady. I checked my phone for signal. There was a little, enough to call my partner and let them know I was safe. As I drove away, the forest grew darker behind me. The day had been full of simple moments. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the cool water of the stream, the scent of pine and earth. It was a good day to be outside, to be moving and alive. I knew I would come back to this trail again someday, better prepared and maybe with a clearer plan. But for now, I was content with the way things had turned out. The hike had been a reminder that even random paths can lead to something worth the effort. A quiet view, a fresh breath of air, and the feeling of having done something on my own. No stories, no shadows, just the trail and me. And that was enough. I set out early in the morning, just as the sun was starting to push its light through the thick layer of clouds. The air was cool and fresh, with a faint scent of wet earth and pine needles all around. I had planned this hike on a whim, choosing a trail that looked promising on the map but that I had never been on before. The path was marked by rough signs nailed to trees, some faded from years of sun and rain, and it wound through dense forest that grew taller and thicker the further I went. At first, the trail was easy enough. Soft dirt beneath my boots, broken here and there by roots and scattered stones. I passed small clearings where wildflowers grew, splashes of color among the endless green. Birds called out overhead, their songs mixing with the sound of a small creek that followed the trail on one side. The forest felt calm and alive. I kept a steady pace, breathing steadily and feeling the rhythm of my steps in tune with the quiet world around me. After a couple of hours, the terrain began to change. The trees grew closer together, their trunks thicker and their branches reaching over the path, creating a tunnel of leaves and shadows. The ground became rockier, with larger stones and patches of moss that made footing tricky. I slowed down to watch each step carefully, balancing on the uneven surface. A thin mist started to rise, curling low over the earth and giving the woods a muted, gray glow. At one point, the trail climbed steeply. My legs burned as I pushed myself up the slope, gripping at roots and rocks for support. Sweat soaked through my shirt despite the cool air. When I finally reached the top, I paused to catch my breath. From there, I could see a small valley below, filled with trees and a patchwork of shadows where the sun broke through the clouds. The view was wide and quiet, stretching out to the edges of the hills beyond. I took a sip of water, wiping the sweat from my brow. My backpack felt heavy, but it carried everything I needed: extra clothes, food, a map, a first aid kit, and a flashlight just in case. I had learned to prepare for anything, no matter how simple a trip seemed. Still, I had not planned for what came next. The trail continued on the other side of the ridge, but when I reached it, I noticed something was off. The usual markers, painted blazes on trees, small wooden signs, were gone or altered. One sign I passed before the climb was turned around. The arrows on it no longer pointed the same way. For a moment, I thought maybe I had taken a wrong turn earlier, but I had checked my map multiple times, and everything seemed to match. I kept walking, trying to stay calm. The forest was quiet now, almost too quiet. The birds were silent. The creek's babble was faint and distant. The mist had thickened, swirling around the tree trunks like a slow-moving river of smoke. My boots sank slightly in the damp earth with each step, and the smell of wet leaves and decaying wood was stronger. The path felt less like a trail now and more like a faint suggestion through the undergrowth. Some spots looked like they hadn't been walked in for a while. I pushed branches aside, trying to keep on course. Every so often, I checked the compass app on my phone. The battery was low but still working, and it showed I was moving roughly in the right direction. Time passed slowly. The sun disappeared behind thick clouds, and the forest dimmed further. My legs ached from the uneven ground and constant climbing and descending. I stopped to rest on a fallen log, taking a bite of a granola bar and sipping the last of my water. My phone battery warned me again, and I switched it off to save power. As I stood and prepared to move again, I noticed something else. The trail markers were no longer there at all. No signs, no blazes, no arrows. Just trees and shadows and thick, wet moss. The path was gone. I took a deep breath and tried to think logically. The map in my pack showed the trail continuing straight ahead. If I could find a stream I saw marked nearby, I could follow it downhill and maybe find the main road or a clearing. The forest felt less friendly, but I trusted my instincts. I stepped forward slowly, careful not to slip on moss-covered stones or hidden roots. The mist made everything look different, shadows blending with shapes of trees and rocks. My heart beat a little faster. I tried to focus on the sounds. Distant water, wind through the branches, my own breathing. The silence was heavy, but I knew I had to keep moving. After about 20 minutes, I heard the faint rush of water. Relief washed over me. I followed the sound and soon found a narrow stream cutting through the forest floor. This clear water moved quickly over smooth stones. I crouched to fill my bottle and drink, then stood to follow the stream downstream. The path along the stream was easier, with fewer obstacles and a gentle slope. I kept my eyes on the water and moved steadily. The mist began to thin, and after a while, sunlight broke through the clouds again. Birds started singing, and the forest seemed to wake up. Eventually, I spotted a dirt road through the trees. The sound of a car engine echoed faintly in the distance. I picked up my pace, my legs moving faster despite the fatigue. The road led out of the forest and toward a small parking area. My car was there, just as I had left it. I opened the door, sat down, and took a long breath. The hike had turned harder than I expected, and I had lost the trail for a time. But I made it back safely. I started the engine and drove slowly away, feeling tired but grateful. The forest was quiet behind me, peaceful once again. The whole experience reminded me how important it is to be prepared and alert when hiking alone. Nature is beautiful, but it can change quickly, and what seems familiar can become confusing. I learned to trust my instincts, to stay calm when things don't go as planned, and to respect the power of the wilderness. That day, I came back with more than just tired legs. I came back with a deeper understanding of the forest and myself, and that was worth every step. I set out early that morning, carrying a pack heavier than I liked but filled with all the basics I thought I might need for a solo day hike. The sky was clear, a soft blue stretching above the tall trees lining the trailhead. The air smelled fresh and cool, the kind of crispness that wakes you up better than coffee. I had no set destination in mind, just the urge to get lost in the woods for a while, away from the noise and rush of everyday life. The trail started easy enough, winding gently up a slope covered with a thick carpet of pine needles. Every step made a satisfying crunch, and small patches of sunlight filtered through the branches, making patterns on the ground. I noticed the way the wind moved through the treetops, a soft whisper that seemed to carry the forest's calm with it. Birds sang here and there, mostly unseen but their songs a comforting backdrop. I moved steadily, careful to watch my footing as the trail grew steeper. The path was narrow, sometimes barely wider than a single boot, with roots and rocks poking out in places. My legs ached after the first hour, the weight of the pack pulling down, but I welcomed the effort. The sweat cooled quickly in the cool mountain air. After a while, the trees thinned, and the trail opened onto a rocky ridge. From there, the view stretched out in all directions. Rolling hills blanketed with trees, faraway ridges fading into the blue haze of distance, and the winding ribbon of a river down below. I paused, took a deep breath, and felt a rare kind of quiet settle over me. Not just around me, but inside. No phone, no messages, no plans. Just this moment. I kept going, following the trail as it dipped back into the woods. The path grew less clear here, scattered with fallen leaves and broken branches. I noticed small signs that I wasn't alone. Animal tracks in the mud, the occasional broken twig. Nothing alarming, just the quiet presence of the forest's other inhabitants. Hours passed. The sun shifted west, the light growing warmer and softer. I stopped to eat a quick lunch, unpacking a sandwich and some fruit. Sitting on a smooth rock, I watched a squirrel dart between trees, its small movements quick and lively. My muscles felt tired but strong. I knew I was a few miles from the car, but not exactly sure how far. I wasn't worried, the trail was marked, and I had a map and compass in my pack. After lunch, the trail began a long descent, winding down through a thicker part of the forest. The air here was cooler and damper, with the smell of moss and earth strong around me. Ferns grew tall along the path, and I spotted a few bright mushrooms peeking through the underbrush. It was quiet again except for the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot and the distant call of a hawk. At one point, I stepped carefully across a small creek. The water was cold and clear, running over smooth stones. I dipped my hand in, letting the chill spread through my fingers. It felt good after the effort of the climb earlier. I filled my water bottle from the creek using a small filter I always carried. Staying hydrated was important. As the afternoon wore on, the trail curved sharply and I noticed a change in the landscape. The trees grew taller and more dense, their trunks thick and gnarled. The ground was rockier and uneven. The sun was dipping lower now, and the forest shadows stretched long and dark. I slowed down, paying close attention to the trail markers, painted blazes on tree trunks and small piles of rocks. It was easy to lose your way here if you weren't careful. My steps grew lighter, quieter. I wanted to stay alert but also calm. Suddenly, the trail seemed to disappear. No clear path ahead, just thick brush and fallen logs. I stopped and looked around. It felt like the trail split or was blocked, maybe from a storm that had passed through days earlier. I pulled out my map and compass, cross-checking the terrain and my position. Taking a deep breath, I decided to make my way carefully off the main path, aiming to reach a known point marked on the map. A small clearing near a creek that could serve as a good place to rest if needed. I moved slowly, stepping over roots and ducking under branches. My heart beat a little faster, but I stayed focused on the compass. After a tense 10 minutes, I finally saw the clearing ahead, a bright patch of sunlight shining through the trees. Relief washed over me. I sat down on a flat rock, taking off my pack to rest my shoulders. I drank water, ate a little trail mix, and looked around. The clearing was peaceful, a perfect little spot with wildflowers and buzzing insects. I felt the steady beat of my own breathing and the steady pulse of life around me. After a few minutes, I took out my phone to check the time and signal. A small bar of reception popped up, enough to send a quick message to a friend telling them where I was and that I was fine. I stayed there a while longer, letting the calm sink in. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. I packed up carefully, making sure to leave no trace of my stay. The trail back to the car was easier to find from here, marked clearly once again. Walking back in the fading light, I moved steadily but without rush. The forest changed with the sunset, cooler and quieter. I reached the parking area just as the last light slipped behind the hills. The car was where I left it, and the quiet hum of the engine was a small comfort after the silence of the woods. Driving home, I thought about the day, the feeling of being part of something bigger, the simple beauty of nature, and the steady rhythm of walking through the wild. The tiredness in my legs was the good kind, proof of effort and time well spent. The world felt a little slower and clearer than it had that morning. That day wasn't about conquering a peak or reaching some famous spot. It was about the small details, the sound of the creek, the smell of pine, the way the light moved through the trees. It was about being fully present and finding peace in the quiet moments. And that, I realized, was the real reward of hiking alone. I woke up early that morning, feeling the usual mix of excitement and calm before a hike. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft, golden light over the trees outside my small cabin. I packed my backpack carefully, making sure I had enough water, some snacks, a map, and my basic first aid kit. The trail I had chosen was one I had never been on before, a random pick from an old hiking guide I found in a secondhand bookstore. It promised a quiet route through mixed forests and gentle hills, with a small lake at the halfway point. I liked the idea of a peaceful walk, away from the usual crowded spots. The air was crisp as I stepped onto the trail, the soft crunch of leaves and pine needles under my boots the only sound at first. The path was narrow but clear, winding gently between tall trees. The forest around me was full of life, the distant call of birds, the occasional rustle of small animals moving in the underbrush. The smell of damp earth and pine was fresh and sharp, filling my lungs with every breath. I moved at a steady pace, enjoying the quiet and the rhythm of walking. After about an hour, the trail began to climb gradually. The trees thinned a little, and I could see patches of sky through the branches. The sun rose higher, warming my back and casting long shadows on the ground. I stopped for a moment to take a drink of water and look around. The forest seemed to open up, and I could see hills rolling away in the distance, covered in green and gold. The map said the lake was just beyond the next ridge. As I climbed the ridge, the path became rocky in places. I had to watch my step more carefully, but the effort was worth it. When I reached the top, I paused again to catch my breath and enjoy the view. The lake lay below, shining like a mirror, calm and clear. The water reflected the blue sky and the trees around it. I felt a deep sense of peace standing there, away from noise and distractions. I made my way down to the lake, finding a small flat area near the shore to rest. The ground was soft with moss and fallen leaves. I sat down, pulled out some food, and ate slowly, listening to the quiet sounds of the forest. Occasionally, a gentle breeze moved across the water, sending tiny ripples to the shore. The only other movement came from a few ducks paddling near the reeds. I stayed there for some time, letting the calm settle into me. After the break, I packed up and continued on the trail, which looped around the lake and then headed back into the forest. The path was softer here, covered with fallen needles and leaves. The trees stood closer together, their branches forming a kind of roof overhead. The light was dimmer, filtered through the leaves. I could see little plants and flowers along the edges of the path, and sometimes a squirrel darting up a tree. As the afternoon moved on, I noticed the trail started to change. The ground became uneven, and in some places, roots crossed the path like natural obstacles. I had to slow down and step carefully. The forest felt older here, wilder. I liked this part, the way the trees grew thicker and the air smelled earthier. I spotted a few mushrooms near a fallen log and paused to take a closer look. Their shapes and colors were strange but beautiful in their quiet way. After a while, I came to a small creek crossing the trail. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones with a soft murmur. There was a makeshift wooden bridge, just a few planks laid across the stream. I tested each plank carefully before crossing. On the other side, the trail climbed gently again, leading me deeper into the woods. The afternoon light grew softer as the sun began to lower. Shadows stretched long and the forest took on a golden hue. I checked my watch and realized I had been hiking for several hours. I decided to start making my way back toward the cabin before it got dark. The trail was familiar now, easier to follow with the fading light. On the return leg, I noticed how different the forest looked in the evening. The sounds were quieter, the colors muted. I felt a slight chill in the air and pulled my jacket tighter around me. I kept my pace steady but slower, careful not to trip on roots or rocks in the dim light. As I neared the end of the trail, I passed by a clearing where the last rays of sun were slipping behind the trees. The sky was a soft pink and orange, fading to blue. I stopped to take it all in, the peacefulness of the forest at dusk settling over me. It was the kind of moment that made the whole hike feel worth it. The quiet beauty of nature, the feeling of being alone but not lonely. When I finally reached the cabin, my legs were tired but my mind felt clear. I unpacked my gear, drank some water, and sat for a while on the porch. The forest was dark now, the sounds of night insects and distant birds filling the air. I felt grateful for the day, for the chance to be outside, to move through the woods and see places I had never seen before. The hike was exactly what I needed. Not too hard, not too easy, just a long walk through nature to clear my head. I made a mental note to return to this trail again someday. It was a simple day. No surprises, no dangers, just the steady rhythm of walking and the quiet world of the forest around me. That kind of peace is rare and precious, and I was glad to have found it. I set out early in the morning, carrying a backpack loaded with the essentials: water, snacks, a map, compass, and some extra clothes. The trailhead was quiet, the kind of peaceful that only exists before the world fully wakes up. The sky was still a pale blue, the sun just beginning to push away the last shadows of night. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool, fresh air fill my lungs. The scent of pine trees and damp earth was sharp and clean, a natural perfume that reminded me why I loved hiking alone. There was no rush today. I wanted to take my time and let the trail guide me through the forest. The path started narrow, winding through tall trees with trunks thick and rough beneath my fingers when I brushed past them. The ground was soft with fallen leaves and pine needles, cushioning each step and muffling the sound of my boots. Every now and then, a bird would call out somewhere high above, breaking the silence with its sharp song. I could hear the distant sound of a stream running somewhere ahead, a steady, gentle murmur that promised water and a place to rest. As I moved deeper into the woods, the trail opened up in places to reveal small clearings where sunlight spilled down in golden patches. Wildflowers grew in clusters here, yellow, purple, and white, adding color to the greens and browns of the forest. I stopped for a moment to admire a patch of bright bluebells, their delicate petals nodding in the soft breeze. I took a sip of water, wiping the sweat from my forehead. The day was warming up, but the shade of the trees kept the air fresh and cool. The trail gradually climbed, getting steeper and rockier. My legs started to feel the effort, muscles tightening with each step upward. I slowed my pace, careful to place my feet on solid ground. Loose stones could easily send me slipping, and I wanted to stay safe. The forest changed as I gained altitude. The trees grew shorter and more spaced out, and patches of moss covered the rocks and fallen logs. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of the valley below, a patchwork of green fields and distant houses framed by hills that rolled away to the horizon. About halfway through the hike, I reached a small ridge. From here, the view opened up completely. The sky stretched wide, a bright blue dome with only a few fluffy clouds drifting lazily. Below, the forest spread out like a vast green carpet. I sat on a large rock, feeling the warmth of the sun on my back. I ate some trail mix and drank more water, letting the quiet settle over me. No sounds but the wind in the trees and the distant call of a hawk circling above. After a while, I stood up and continued. The trail curved around the ridge, leading down through a dense patch of fir trees. The air smelled stronger here. Pine resin and damp earth mixed together. The ground was uneven, roots twisting across the path like the veins of the forest. I had to watch my step carefully. My boots gripped the soil, and I used my trekking poles to steady myself as I moved downward. The afternoon sun began to lean toward the west, casting longer shadows. I knew I needed to keep an eye on the time. I wasn't planning to camp out, so I wanted to finish the loop before dark. But there was still a feeling of calm. No hurry, just the steady rhythm of walking and breathing. As the trail flattened out again, I crossed a small wooden bridge over a creek. The water was clear and cold, tumbling over smooth stones with a light splash. I stopped to dip my hand in and splash some on my face. The cold water was refreshing and sharp, waking me up after the long walk. On the other side of the bridge, the trail led into a thick patch of bushes and low trees. The light dimmed here, filtered through the dense leaves above. Suddenly, I noticed something out of place. The trail markers, small painted blazes on trees, didn't look right. One was crooked, and another seemed to be pointing in a direction that didn't match the map. I stopped and checked my compass. The direction the markers were pointing wasn't the one I expected. For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe I had missed a turn somewhere. I took out my map and laid it on a flat rock. I traced the path I had taken with my finger and compared it to the trail markers. It became clear that the markers had been moved or altered. The arrows pointed deeper into the forest, away from the main trail loop I planned to follow. My heart beat a little faster. There was no obvious reason why someone would do that, but it could cause serious problems if I followed the wrong path. I decided to trust my map and compass instead of the markers. I carefully turned back a few steps and found the correct fork in the trail, heading back in the right direction. It felt strange to realize that someone had changed the markers, but I didn't want to think about why. What mattered was staying on the safe path. The last part of the hike was quieter. The trees thinned out, and the trail ran alongside a small ridge with a steep drop on one side. I stayed close to the inside edge, moving carefully. The wind picked up, cool and steady, brushing against my face. The sky was streaked with orange and pink as the sun started to set. The light shifted quickly, and I knew I had to finish before it got too dark. Finally, I saw the parking lot through the trees. My car was there, just as I had left it. I felt relief flood through me. The long day of walking was ending safely. I sat on a bench near the lot for a few minutes, letting the tiredness sink in. The forest was quiet now except for the sound of a few birds settling in for the night. I packed up my gear slowly, careful not to rush. The sun disappeared below the horizon, and the sky turned dark blue. When I finally got in the car and started the engine, it roared to life without any problems. Driving away, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The trail had tested me, but I had stayed focused and calm. The markers had been confusing, but I had trusted my instincts and tools. The hike was real and raw, full of hard steps, sharp views, and quiet moments that filled me with peace. That day reminded me why I liked hiking alone. It was about trusting myself and nature, and knowing that no matter what happened, I could find my way back. The forest didn't tell stories or play tricks. It just was. And in that honesty, I found something steady and true. I went on that hike because I wanted quiet and space in my head. Work had been heavy for months and I was sleeping badly. I picked a random trail from an old guidebook, a long loop through dense hills far from towns. The book said it was lightly used but safe. I packed simple food, water, a map, a headlamp, a small first aid kit, and a cheap compass. I told myself I would be back before dark. The trailhead was empty when I arrived. The air smelled wet and cold. The forest was thick with tall trees that blocked most of the sky. The ground was soft with old leaves and pine needles. Every step made a dull sound. I felt calm at first. The trail was clear and wide enough to follow without thinking. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Even birds were rare. I could hear my breathing and my boots on dirt. After 2 hours, the trail split. The map showed a loop, but the sign at the split was faded and bent. One arrow pointed left, one right. Both names were scratched and hard to read. I chose left because the ground looked more used. The path narrowed soon after. Branches brushed my arms. The trees grew closer together. Light dropped fast even though it was still early afternoon. I noticed small things that felt wrong but easy to ignore. Fresh boot prints that did not match mine. Broken twigs at shoulder height. A dropped food wrapper that looked new. I told myself other hikers were nearby. That thought should have made me feel better. It did not. The trail started to climb. My legs burned. Sweat soaked my shirt. I stopped to drink water and check the map. The landmarks did not match what I saw. A ridge that should have been to my right was missing. The slope felt steeper than the book described. I walked on, expecting the trail to correct itself. Then the path disappeared. It did not end clean. It just thinned into nothing. Leaves covered the ground in every direction. I stood still and listened. The forest felt heavy and closed. I tried to backtrack, but my own prints were lost in the mess of leaves. I used the compass and headed east, which should have brought me back to the loop. Walking without a trail changed everything. Every step needed thought. Branches caught my pack. Rocks rolled under my boots. I moved slow to avoid twisting an ankle. The light faded more. The trees blocked the sun and the sky looked gray and flat. I checked the time and felt a tight pull in my chest. I heard movement behind me. Not a single sound, but a pattern. Leaves shifting. A pause. Then more movement. I stopped. The sound stopped. I moved again. It followed. I told myself it was an animal. That explanation did not fit the rhythm. Felt measured. I changed direction and moved faster downhill. The ground dipped and I slid, scraping my palm on a rock. Blood smeared across my skin. Pain made things sharp and clear. The sound behind me came closer. I did not run. Running would mean falling. I reached a narrow creek. The water was shallow but fast. I stepped into it and walked downstream, placing my feet in the water to hide tracks. The cold bit into my legs. I kept moving until my calves ached. I climbed out on the far side and pushed into thick brush, then stopped and listened. Silence came back. My heart hammered. I stayed still for a long time. The light was going. I turned on my headlamp. The beam cut a weak tunnel through leaves and trunks. I checked my supplies and forced myself to slow down. Panic would finish me. I decided to find higher ground. From a ridge I could get bearings or maybe see a road. The climb was brutal. Loose soil slid under me. I grabbed roots and branches. My hands shook from effort and fear. At the top, the forest opened a little. I could see layers of dark hills with no lights anywhere. No road. No town. I heard movement again, closer than before. The sound came from my left, then behind, then stopped. I turned slowly, sweeping the light. The beam caught nothing solid. I smelled sweat that was not mine. My stomach dropped. I moved along the ridge, keeping trees between me and the sounds. I found a fallen log and crouched behind it. I stayed there as the sky went black. My legs cramped. Bugs crawled on my face. I kept the light off and listened. Footsteps passed below me. Slow, careful. They stopped. I held my breath until my chest burned. The steps moved on. I waited longer than felt safe. When I moved again, I went the opposite way, staying low, using the ridge to mask sound. Hours dragged. My headlamp battery dimmed. I found a faint dirt track that looked like an old service path. I followed it with shaking legs. The path widened. Gravel appeared. Then a metal guardrail reflected my light. I stepped onto a road. It was empty but real and solid. I followed it downhill until my legs failed me. Far below, I saw headlights. I waved my light and kept moving until the car slowed and stopped. I did not speak. I just stood there, shaking, until the driver called for help. Rescue came later. They took me back to the trailhead. Rangers searched the area the next day and found nothing they would explain to me. I went home with cuts, bruises, and a deep fear that stayed. I do not hike alone anymore. I plan routes better. I turn back early. I learned that being prepared does not mean being safe. It only means you might live long enough to leave. I went hiking alone on a random weekday because I had time off and wanted quiet. I chose a trail I had never walked before, one that cut through a wide stretch of forest and climbed a long ridge. It was not a famous place. It did not have signs every few steps or crowds. I liked that. I packed light but smart. Water, food, a headlamp, extra socks, a small first aid kit, a map printed on paper, and my phone. I did not expect trouble. I expected a long walk, sore legs, and a calm return before dark. The first few hours were easy. The trail was narrow but clear. Pine needles covered the ground and softened every step. The air smelled damp and clean. I could hear wind moving through the trees and birds shifting above me. I kept a steady pace and stopped now and then to drink water. I checked the map often even though the trail seemed obvious. I did not want to drift off it without noticing. Around midday the trail started to change. The ground became rockier. Tree roots crossed the path like thick ropes. The slope grew steeper and the forest closed in. Light thinned and the air felt cooler. I noticed fewer footprints. That did not bother me at first. I assumed most people turned around earlier. I reached a section where the trail split. One path climbed sharply. The other curved and dropped slightly. The map showed only one trail. I stood there longer than I planned. The ground showed marks on both sides, but the climbing path looked more worn. I followed it. After another hour, the trail faded. It did not vanish all at once. It just became harder to see. I kept walking, telling myself it would clear again. I used the map and matched the land shapes as best I could. The ridge was on my right. The slope dropped on my left. I felt sure I was still moving the right way. Then I noticed something wrong. The forest was too quiet. Not silent, but wrong. No birds. No wind. Just my breathing and the sound of my boots on rock. I stopped and listened. I stood there long enough for sweat to cool on my back. That feeling did not pass. I kept moving because standing still made my thoughts worse. Not long after, I saw signs of people. Not hikers. Broken branches stacked poorly. Pieces of plastic caught on bushes. A smell that did not belong in the forest. Chemical and sharp. I slowed down and watched the ground. I did not see fresh footprints, but the area felt used. I told myself to turn back. That was the smart choice. When I tried, I realized the path behind me did not look familiar. Trees crowded together in a way that made every direction look the same. I checked my phone. No signal. I checked the map again. The ridge was still there, but I could not tell if I had crossed something important without noticing. I decided to head downhill because water often followed low ground. The slope was steep and loose. I moved carefully, testing each step. Halfway down, I slipped. My foot slid on wet rock and I went down hard. Pain shot through my ankle and up my leg. I lay there breathing fast, waiting for it to settle. I sat up slowly and checked my ankle. It hurt, but it held weight. I wrapped it tight and rested longer than I wanted. The light through the trees had changed. It was later than I thought. I continued downhill at a slower pace. The forest grew thicker. Thorns scratched my arms. Sweat soaked my shirt again. I finally heard water. A small stream cut through the ground. I followed it, stepping from rock to rock. The sound helped calm me. Then I saw it. A clearing that did not belong there. Plants in neat rows. Dark hoses running between them. Bags of fertilizer stacked near a tarp. This was not a campsite. This was not legal. My stomach dropped. I froze and scanned the area. No movement. No voices. Still, I knew people could be nearby. I backed away slowly, careful not to leave clear tracks. My heart beat so hard it made me dizzy. I did not run. I moved until the clearing vanished behind trees. Then I changed direction and climbed away from the stream, even though my ankle screamed with each step. I kept moving until my legs shook. I stopped only when I reached higher ground where the forest opened a bit. I checked the sky. The sun was low. I had hours before full dark, but not many. I made a plan. I would stay high and follow the ridge until morning if I had to. Ridges are easier to follow than valleys. I marked my direction using the sun and kept going. Night came faster than I wanted. Shadows stretched and swallowed the ground. I used my headlamp sparingly to save power. Every sound felt close. I forced myself to breathe slow and steady. I ate even though I was not hungry. I drank water in small sips. I found a place to sit against a large rock and waited. I did not sleep much. My ankle throbbed. Cold crept into my bones. I stayed alert, listening, counting breaths, watching the sky lighten. The first light, I moved again. I followed the ridge for hours. My pace was slow but steady. The forest began to thin. I started to see signs of a real trail again. Cut branches, worn dirt, footprints. Late in the morning, I stepped onto a wide path with clear markers. Relief hit me so hard my knees almost gave out. I followed it downhill and soon heard a road. I reached my car early that afternoon. I sat there for a long time before starting it. I cleaned the blood from my leg and unwrapped my ankle. It was swollen and dark. I drove straight to get help. I still hike. I still go alone sometimes. But I respect the line between calm and danger now. I do not push past fading trails. I do not ignore signs that feel wrong. That day ended with me walking out on my own feet, and that ending was clear and final. I was lucky. I went hiking alone because I needed quiet and space. I had been working long hours and sleeping badly. I picked a trail that was supposed to be simple and well marked. It was late summer and the weather report looked calm. I packed light but careful. Water, food, map, compass, headlamp, first aid kit, extra socks. I parked at a small gravel lot just after sunrise. The air felt cool and clean. The forest smelled like wet dirt and pine. I felt relaxed when I locked the car and started walking. The trail began wide and clear. Packed dirt, gentle slope, trees spaced enough to let light through. Birds moved above me. My boots made a steady sound that felt comforting. I walked at a slow pace and paid attention to my breathing. I checked my watch now and then, but I was not in a rush. After about an hour, the trail narrowed. The ground became rocky. Roots crossed the path and forced me to watch my steps. The forest grew thicker. Light faded and the air felt colder. I reached a junction that matched the map. I turned onto the longer loop. From there, the trail climbed. My legs started to burn, but it felt good. Sweat ran down my back. I stopped to drink water and eat a small snack. Everything felt normal. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, but empty quiet. No wind, no insects, just my breathing and my steps. A few miles later, I noticed the trail markers were harder to see. Some were faded. Some were missing. The ground looked disturbed in places like water had washed it away. I kept going because the map showed the trail following a ridge and looping back. I trusted it too much. Clouds rolled in without much warning. The light changed fast. The forest turned gray and flat. I put on a light jacket and kept moving. Then I slipped. My foot slid on loose rock and I went down hard on my side. Pain shot through my ankle. I lay still for a minute and focused on breathing. When I tried to stand, my ankle screamed. I tested my weight slowly. I could walk, but not well. I wrapped it tight with a bandage and took pain medicine. Turning back felt like the right move. I checked the map again. I thought I knew where I was. I started back, but the trail did not look the same. I walked for a long time without seeing a clear marker. The forest closed in tighter. Bushes scratched my arms. The ground dropped away steeply on one side. I stopped and listened. Still nothing. No voices. No trail noise. Just my breath and a faint wind high above the trees. I realized I had drifted off the main path. Panic tried to creep in. I pushed it down by doing simple things. I sat. I drank water, ate. I checked the compass and oriented the map. I chose a direction that should lead downhill toward the lot. I moved slow to protect my ankle. Every step hurt. My pace dropped to almost nothing. Rain started as a light mist and then turned steady. The ground became slick. I fell again but caught myself with my hands. Mud covered my clothes. My ankle swelled more. I knew I could not keep wandering. I looked for a place to wait it out and rest. I found a cluster of trees close together and used my jacket and emergency blanket to block the wind. I stayed there for a long time. I kept checking the time and the light. Afternoon slid toward evening. As the rain eased, I heard distant road noise. It was faint but real. It gave me direction and hope. I waited a bit more until my ankle felt stable enough. I stood slowly and followed the sound. The ground sloped down and the trees thinned. I crossed a shallow stream and climbed a small bank. The forest opened into a wide cut where power lines ran overhead. I felt relief hit me hard. My hands shook. I sat and let it pass. I followed the cut carefully. It led to a dirt service road. The road led to pavement. The pavement led to the edge of the parking area where my car waited. The sky was dark by the time I reached it. I unlocked the door and sat inside for a long time before starting the engine. My ankle throbbed. My clothes were soaked and muddy. I felt exhausted but clear-headed. I drove slowly to the nearest town and went to a small clinic. The ankle was sprained but not broken. They wrapped it and told me to rest. Later that night at home, I cleaned my gear and laid everything out to dry. I replayed the hike in my head. The mistakes were simple and obvious. Trusting the trail too much. Moving too fast when conditions changed. Not turning back early. The ending of that day was not dramatic. I did not conquer anything. I just made it back. That was enough. The hike taught me respect for small decisions and quiet warnings. I still hike, but I plan more and turn back sooner. I remember how fast normal can turn heavy and how calm focus can bring you home. I went hiking alone because I needed space from everything that felt loud in my life. Work had been stacking up, sleep was broken, and my head felt heavy all the time. I picked a long trail that cut through state land and climbed into higher ground. It was not famous. It did not have viewpoints shared online. It was just a thin line on a map with a parking pull-off and a warning sign about limited cell service. That was exactly what I wanted. I arrived early in the morning when the air was still cool and wet. The parking area was empty except for my car and a rusted trash barrel. The forest around me was quiet in a way that felt deep, like sound had trouble traveling there. I checked my pack again even though I had already done it twice. Water, food, spare socks, jacket, headlamp, map, compass. Everything was there. I locked the car and started walking. The trail began wide and flat. Pine needles covered the ground and softened my steps. Sunlight came through the trees in broken patches. I paid attention to small details because it helped calm my mind. The smell of damp soil, the sound of birds moving above me, the slow rhythm of my breathing. For the first few hours, everything felt normal. I passed old trail markers nailed to trees. Some were faded. Some had bullet holes. I stayed on course and kept a steady pace. As the trail climbed higher, the forest changed. Pines gave way to thinner trees and thick brush. The ground became rocky and uneven. My legs started to feel the work. Sweat soaked into my shirt and dried again as the wind picked up. I stopped often to drink water and check my map. According to it, the trail made a long loop and crossed a creek before turning back toward the parking area. It should have taken me back by late afternoon. Around midday, I noticed the trail was narrower than before. It looked less traveled. Grass grew in the center. Some branches blocked parts of it. I assumed it was because fewer people hiked this section. I pushed through and kept going. The markers were still there, though spaced farther apart. I reminded myself that discomfort does not always mean danger. The first real problem started when I reached the creek. On the map, it was marked clearly. A simple crossing point. In reality, it was wider than expected and running fast from recent rain. The rocks were slick. I stood there for a long time judging the best place to cross. Turning back would add hours. I decided to cross carefully. I stepped slowly, testing each rock. My boots slipped once and icy water flooded in up to my ankle. My heart jumped, but I kept my balance and made it across. After the crossing, things felt off. The trail on the other side was hard to find. I walked in small circles until I spotted a marker farther ahead. It was tilted and old. I followed it and found what looked like the path again. I told myself it was fine. Trails change. Maps are not perfect. Time passed in a strange way after that. The light shifted and the forest grew darker earlier than it should have. Clouds rolled in and blocked the sun. I checked my watch and felt a small wave of panic. I was behind schedule. I picked up my pace, but the ground slowed me down. Roots caught my boots. Rocks shifted underfoot. At one point I realized I had not seen a marker in a long time. I stopped and forced myself to breathe slowly. I took out the map and compass. I tried to match the land around me to what I saw on paper. It did not line up the way I expected. The creek should have been behind me and downhill. Instead, I could still hear water nearby. That meant I was not where I thought I was. I made a decision to head downhill, aiming toward where the trail should reconnect. Moving downhill usually leads somewhere. As I walked, I noticed signs that made my stomach tighten. Broken branches that looked old. Faded tape tied to a tree that was not on any map. A small clearing with flattened grass, like someone had rested there a long time ago. No trash, no fire ring, just pressed earth. The light faded more. I checked my headlamp and kept it ready. I knew hiking out in the dark would be risky, but stopping overnight without planning would be worse. I focused on steady movement. I avoided rushing. My legs ached. My ankle from the creek crossing throbbed. Eventually I heard a sound that cut through everything else. A distant hum. At first I thought it was wind, but it stayed steady. It was faint but real. I followed it carefully, adjusting my direction little by little. After nearly an hour, the forest thinned. The ground leveled. I broke through a line of trees and saw a dirt road. I stood there for a long time just looking at it. Tire tracks. A crushed can near the edge. It felt unreal after hours of trees and rock. I knew roads meant people and people meant help. I followed the road downhill until I recognized the curve near the parking area. My car was still there, alone, exactly where I left it. I sat on the ground beside it and took off my pack. My hands shook as the tension drained away. The sky was dark now, but I was safe. I changed my wet sock, drank the last of my water, and sat until my breathing slowed. The drive home was quiet. My body was tired in a deep way that sleep would fix, but my mind stayed alert. I kept thinking about how small choices added up out there, how easy it was to drift off course without noticing. Nothing chased me. Nothing supernatural happened. The danger was simple and real. Distance, time, and the false comfort of thinking I was in control. When I finally got home, I cleaned my gear and laid everything out to dry. I marked the map with notes about where things went wrong. I did not feel proud or scared. I felt aware. Hiking alone taught me that the land does not care about confidence or plans. It only responds to attention and respect. I went to bed sore and exhausted, but clear-headed, knowing I would hike again, and knowing I would never take a trail lightly again. I went hiking alone on a random weekday because I had time off and wanted quiet. I chose a trail I had never walked before, one that cut through a wide stretch of forest and climbed a long ridge. It was not a famous place. It did not have signs every few steps or crowds. I liked that. I packed light but smart. Water, food, a headlamp, extra socks, a small first aid kit, a map printed on paper, and my phone. I did not expect trouble. I expected a long walk, sore legs, and a calm return before dark. The first few hours were easy. The trail was narrow but clear. Pine needles covered the ground and softened every step. The air smelled damp and clean. I could hear wind moving through the trees and birds shifting above me. I kept a steady pace and stopped now and then to drink water. I checked the map often even though the trail seemed obvious. I did not want to drift off it without noticing. Around midday, the trail started to change. The ground became rockier. Tree roots crossed the path like thick ropes. The slope grew steeper and the forest closed in. Light thinned and the air felt cooler. I noticed fewer footprints. That did not bother me at first. I assumed most people turned around earlier. I reached a section where the trail split. One path climbed sharply. The other curved and dropped slightly. The map showed only one trail. I stood there longer than I planned. The ground showed marks on both sides, but the climbing path looked more worn. I followed it. After another hour, the trail faded. It did not vanish all at once. It just became harder to see. I kept walking, telling myself it would clear again. I used the map and matched the land shapes as best I could. The ridge was on my right. The slope dropped on my left. I felt sure I was still moving the right way. Then I noticed something wrong. The forest was too quiet. Not silent, but wrong. No birds. No wind. Just my breathing and the sound of my boots on rock. I stopped and listened. I stood there long enough for sweat to cool on my back. That feeling did not pass. I kept moving because standing still made my thoughts worse. Not long after, I saw signs of people. Not hikers. Broken branches stacked poorly. Pieces of plastic caught on bushes. A smell that did not belong in the forest. Chemical and sharp. I slowed down and watched the ground. I did not see fresh footprints, but the area felt used. I told myself to turn back. That was the smart choice. When I tried, I realized the path behind me did not look familiar. Trees crowded together in a way that made every direction look the same. I checked my phone. No signal. I checked the map again. The ridge was still there, but I could not tell if I had crossed something important without noticing. I decided to head downhill because water often followed low ground. The slope was steep and loose. I moved carefully, testing each step. Halfway down, I slipped. My foot slid on wet rock and I went down hard. Pain shot through my ankle and up my leg. I lay there breathing fast, waiting for it to settle. I sat up slowly and checked my ankle. It hurt, but it held weight. I wrapped it tight and rested longer than I wanted. The light through the trees had changed. It was later than I thought. I continued downhill at a slower pace. The forest grew thicker. Thorns scratched my arms. Sweat soaked my shirt again. I finally heard water. A small stream cut through the ground. I followed it, stepping from rock to rock. The sound helped calm me. Then I saw it. A clearing that did not belong there. Plants in neat rows. Dark hoses running between them. Bags of fertilizer stacked near a tarp. This was not a campsite. This was not legal. My stomach dropped. I froze and scanned the area. No movement. No voices. Still, I knew people could be nearby. I backed away slowly, careful not to leave clear tracks. My heart beat so hard it made me dizzy. I did not run. I moved until the clearing vanished behind trees. Then I changed direction and climbed away from the stream. Even though my ankle screamed with each step, I kept moving until my legs shook. I stopped only when I reached higher ground where the forest opened a bit. I checked the sky. The sun was low. I had hours before full dark, but not many. I made a plan. I would stay high and follow the ridge until morning if I had to. Ridges are easier to follow than valleys. I marked my direction using the sun and kept going. Night came faster than I wanted. Shadows stretched and swallowed the ground. I used my headlamp sparingly to save power. Every sound felt close. I forced myself to breathe slow and steady. I ate even though I was not hungry. I drank water in small sips. I found a place to sit against a large rock and waited. I did not sleep much. My ankle throbbed. Cold crept into my bones. I stayed alert, listening, counting breaths, watching the sky lighten. The first light, I moved again. I followed the ridge for hours. My pace was slow but steady. The forest began to thin. I started to see signs of a real trail again. Cut branches, worn dirt, footprints. Late in the morning, I stepped onto a wide path with clear markers. Relief hit me so hard my knees almost gave out. I followed it downhill and soon heard a road. I reached my car early that afternoon. I sat there for a long time before starting it. I cleaned the blood from my leg and unwrapped my ankle. It was swollen and dark. I drove straight to get help. I still hike. I still go alone sometimes. But I respect the line between calm and danger now. I do not push past fading trails. I do not ignore signs that feel wrong. That day ended with me walking out on my own feet, and that ending was clear and final. I was lucky. I went hiking alone because I needed quiet and space. I had been working long hours and sleeping badly. I chose a long trail in a remote area that I found on an old park map. It was not popular, and that was the reason I picked it. I wanted empty paths and no people. I parked my car near a rusted trail sign at the edge of the forest just after sunrise. The air was cold and smelled like wet dirt and pine. My phone had signal at the car, but I knew it would disappear once I walked deeper in. I packed water, food, a small first aid kit, a flashlight, and a paper map folded too many times. I locked the car and started walking without looking back. The first few miles were easy. The path was narrow but clear. Leaves covered the ground and the trees were tall enough to block most of the light. My boots made a steady sound with every step. I focused on breathing and the weight of my pack. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No wind, no birds, no insects. Just my steps and my breath. It felt calm but also wrong in a way I could not explain. After some time, the trail split into two paths. The map showed a fork, but the markings on the trees were faded. One path looked more used but went downhill toward thicker trees. The other was thinner and climbed slightly. I chose the climbing path because it matched the map. As I walked, the ground became rocky and uneven. Roots crossed the trail and the slope forced me to slow down. I checked my watch and realized more time had passed than I expected. I noticed the first strange thing when I saw a boot print in the mud ahead of me. It was fresh. The edges were sharp and water had not filled it yet. It was the same size as my boot, but the tread pattern was different. I stopped and looked around. There were no voices, no movement. The forest swallowed everything beyond a few yards. I told myself another hiker must be ahead and kept going. The trail grew harder to follow. In some places, it vanished under fallen branches. In others, it widened for no clear reason. I checked the map again and again. The landmarks did not line up anymore. A creek that should have been on my right was nowhere to be seen. My phone had no signal now. I tried to stay calm and focused on walking in one direction. The boot prints appeared again farther ahead. Sometimes they were beside my own prints in the dirt. Sometimes they crossed the trail and disappeared into the trees. I never heard anyone walking. That bothered me more than the prints themselves. Sound carries in the woods, but there was nothing. Hours passed. The light shifted and shadows grew longer. I realized I was lost. Not just slightly off course, but fully lost. I felt it in my stomach and chest. I stopped walking and forced myself to breathe slowly. Panic would only make things worse. I drank water and ate a small snack. I decided to head downhill since that often leads to water and eventually roads. As I moved downhill, the forest changed. The trees were closer together and the ground was soft like it had not seen sun in a long time. My boots sank into the dirt with each step. The smell changed too. It was heavy and sour. I slipped once and caught myself on a tree. When I looked at my hand, it was shaking. I found the creek near sunset. The water was shallow and slow. I followed it downstream, hoping it would lead somewhere familiar. The boot prints appeared again in the mud near the water. They were everywhere now. Dozens of them. Some pointed upstream, some downstream, some into the trees. It looked like someone had been walking back and forth for a long time. I felt watched, but I never saw anyone. Night came fast. The forest went dark in minutes. I turned on my flashlight and the beam felt weak against the trees. I knew continuing in the dark was dangerous, but staying still felt worse. I kept following the creek. Every sound made my heart jump. Branches snapping, water moving, something brushing leaves nearby. I told myself it was animals, but my body did not believe it. At some point, I realized the boot prints were gone. Completely gone. The mud near the water was smooth and untouched except for my own steps. That scared me more than when they were there. I felt truly alone then. I walked until my legs burned and my feet ached. Finally, I saw something different ahead. A faint orange glow through the trees. I almost cried when I realized it was a road reflector. I pushed through the brush and stumbled onto a dirt road. It was wide and flat and real. I followed it until I reached a small service building with a light on. I knocked on the door until someone came out. They helped me and called for assistance. I was taken back to my car later that night. The ranger told me the trail I chose had been closed years ago due to erosion and poor markings. People got lost there often. When I looked back toward the forest from the safety of the parking area, it looked normal and quiet. No movement, no signs of anyone else. I drove home exhausted and sore. In the days after, I kept thinking about the boot prints and the silence. I still hike, but I never go alone anymore. I check trail updates and stay on marked paths. That hike taught me how quickly things can go wrong and how small a person really is in the woods. The ending was simple. I made it out alive and learned to respect places that do not care if you are prepared or not. I went on that hike because I wanted quiet and space in my head. Work had been heavy for months and I was sleeping badly. I picked a random trail from an old guidebook, a long loop through dense hills far from towns. The book said it was lightly used but safe. I packed simple food, water, a map, a headlamp, a small first aid kit, and a cheap compass. I told myself I would be back before dark. The trailhead was empty when I arrived. The air smelled wet and cold. The forest was thick with tall trees that blocked most of the sky. The ground was soft with old leaves and pine needles. Every step made a dull sound. I felt calm at first. The trail was clear and wide enough to follow without thinking. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Even birds were rare. I could hear my breathing and my boots on dirt. After 2 hours, the trail split. The map showed a loop, but the sign at the split was faded and bent. One arrow pointed left, one right. Both names were scratched and hard to read. I chose left because the ground looked more used. The path narrowed soon after. Branches brushed my arms. The trees grew closer together. Light dropped fast even though it was still early afternoon. I noticed small things that felt wrong but easy to ignore. Fresh boot prints that did not match mine. Broken twigs at shoulder height. A dropped food wrapper that looked new. I told myself other hikers were nearby. That thought should have made me feel better. It did not. The trail started to climb. My legs burned. Sweat soaked my shirt. I stopped to drink water and check the map. The landmarks did not match what I saw. A ridge that should have been to my right was missing. The slope felt steeper than the book described. I walked on, expecting the trail to correct itself. Then the path disappeared. It did not end clean. It just thinned into nothing. Leaves covered the ground in every direction. I stood still and listened. The forest felt heavy and closed. I tried to backtrack, but my own prints were lost in the mess of leaves. I used the compass and headed east, which should have brought me back to the loop. Walking without a trail changed everything. Every step needed thought. Branches caught my pack. Rocks rolled under my boots. I moved slow to avoid twisting an ankle. The light faded more. The trees blocked the sun and the sky looked gray and flat. I checked the time and felt a tight pull in my chest. I heard movement behind me. Not a single sound, but a pattern. Leaves shifting. A pause. Then more movement. I stopped. The sound stopped. I moved again. It followed. I told myself it was an animal. That explanation did not fit the rhythm. Felt measured. I changed direction and moved faster downhill. The ground dipped and I slid, scraping my palm on a rock. Blood smeared across my skin. Pain made things sharp and clear. The sound behind me came closer. I did not run. Running would mean falling. I reached a narrow creek. The water was shallow but fast. I stepped into it and walked downstream, placing my feet in the water to hide tracks. The cold bit into my legs. I kept moving until my calves ached. I climbed out on the far side and pushed into thick brush, then stopped and listened. Silence came back. My heart hammered. I stayed still for a long time. The light was going. I turned on my headlamp. The beam cut a weak tunnel through leaves and trunks. I checked my supplies and forced myself to slow down. Panic would finish me. I decided to find higher ground. From a ridge I could get bearings or maybe see a road. The climb was brutal. Loose soil slid under me. I grabbed roots and branches. My hands shook from effort and fear. At the top, the forest opened a little. I could see layers of dark hills with no lights anywhere. No road, no town. I heard movement again, closer than before. The sound came from my left, then behind, then stopped. I turned slowly, sweeping the light. The beam caught nothing solid. I smelled sweat that was not mine. My stomach dropped. I moved along the ridge, keeping trees between me and the sounds. I found a fallen log and crouched behind it. I stayed there as the sky went black. My legs cramped. Bugs crawled on my face. I kept the light off and listened. Footsteps passed below me. Slow, careful. They stopped. I held my breath until my chest burned. The steps moved on. I waited longer than felt safe. When I moved again, I went the opposite way, staying low, using the ridge to mask sound. Hours dragged. My headlamp battery dimmed. I found a faint dirt track that looked like an old service path. I followed it with shaking legs. The path widened. Gravel appeared. Then a metal guardrail reflected my light. I stepped onto a road. It was empty but real and solid. I followed it downhill until my legs failed me. Far below, I saw headlights. I waved my light and kept moving until the car slowed and stopped. I did not speak. I just stood there, shaking, until the driver called for help. Rescue came later. They took me back to the trailhead. Rangers searched the area the next day and found nothing they would explain to me. I went home with cuts, bruises, and a deep fear that stayed. I do not hike alone anymore. I plan routes better. I turn back early. I learned that being prepared does not mean being safe. It only means you might live long enough to leave. I went hiking alone because I needed distance from everything that felt loud in my life. Work was heavy, sleep was bad, and my phone never stopped lighting up. I chose a long trail that cut through a large forested mountain area, the kind of place where the map showed miles of green with very few labels. I told myself it was safe because it was a known hiking region, even though parts of the trail were rarely used. I packed enough food for 2 days, extra water, a headlamp, a paper map, a small knife, and a basic first aid kit. I left early in the morning when the air was cold and clean and the parking area was empty except for my car. The first few hours were calm. The trail was narrow but clear. Fallen leaves covered the ground in places, and my boots made a steady sound as I walked. Birds moved through the trees above me, and I could hear wind brushing through branches. I kept a slow pace, stopping often to drink water and look around. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. No distant road noise, no planes, just forest sounds and my own breathing. Around midday, the trail started to change. The ground became softer, almost muddy in spots, and the trees grew closer together. The markers were older here, some of them faded or tilted. I checked the map and saw that I was still on the right path, just entering a less maintained section. That did not bother me at first. I had planned for this. After another hour, I noticed something small that made me slow down. There were boot prints in the mud ahead of me. They looked recent. The edges were still sharp, not washed out by rain or covered by debris. At first, I felt relieved. Someone else had been here recently, which meant the trail was still in use. But as I kept walking, the prints stayed with me for a long time. They never passed me, and I never caught up to anyone. They were always just ahead, same size, same pattern. I stopped to eat and rest. When I sat down, the forest felt heavier. The air was still, and the quiet felt pressed in close. I listened carefully. No voices, no footsteps, nothing moving except a few insects. I stood up and continued. Later in the afternoon, the trail split. The signpost was old and cracked. One arrow pointed left, one right. The text was hard to read. I checked the map again and matched the shape of the trail. I took the left path, confident it was correct. The boot prints followed that direction too. About 30 minutes after the split, something felt wrong. The forest looked the same, but my sense of direction felt off. The ground sloped downward more than the map showed. I checked my compass. It did not line up with what I expected. I stopped walking and stood still, trying to calm myself. I told myself maps are not perfect. Trails change. I decided to keep going until I reached the small creek marked on the map. That would confirm my position. But when I reached water, it was not a creek. It was wider and slower, with dark water and no clear crossing. I walked along the edge, looking for a safe place to cross, but the ground was unstable and thick with roots. As the sun lowered, the forest darkened faster than I expected. The trees blocked the light, and shadows stretched across the ground. I realized I was not going to reach my planned camping spot before night. I needed to stop. I found a small flat area away from the water and set up my tent. My hands felt clumsy, and I kept dropping things. I forced myself to slow down. While gathering small pieces of wood for a fire, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. A piece of orange fabric was caught on a low branch nearby. It looked torn, like it had been ripped. It was not trail tape. It looked like part of a jacket or a backpack strap. I looked around but saw nothing else. I did not light a fire. I did not want to draw attention. I ate cold food and drank water. As night fully settled in, the forest changed. Sounds became sharper. Every small movement felt close. I lay inside my tent, listening. At some point, I heard footsteps. Slow, steady, not heavy like an animal. They moved around my campsite, never too close, never too far. I held my breath and stayed still. The steps eventually faded. I did not sleep much. When morning came, I felt exhausted but focused. I packed quickly and left the campsite as soon as there was enough light. I decided to backtrack. Going deeper felt wrong. As I walked, I realized something disturbing. The boot prints were still there, but now they were facing the opposite direction. Facing the way I was going. They were not mine. I stopped and looked closely. Different tread. Larger than my boots. I kept moving faster now, but careful not to trip. The trail seemed unfamiliar even though I was sure I had walked it before. Landmarks did not match my memory. After hours of walking, I reached the split again. This time, the signpost was different. One arrow was missing. The wood looked freshly broken. I took the right path this time. My legs burned, and my throat was dry. After a long stretch, I heard something I had never been so happy to hear. Distant traffic. The sound grew louder as I walked. Eventually, trees thinned, and I saw a road through the branches. I stepped out of the forest and onto the shoulder of the road. My car was parked further down, exactly where I left it. I unlocked it, got inside, and locked the doors immediately. I sat there for a long time before starting the engine. Later, after I was home and safe, I checked online. There were reports of hikers going missing in that area over the years. Some were found days later, disoriented and injured. Some were never found at all. I do not hike alone anymore. I do not go deep into trails that are not maintained. I learned that getting lost does not always mean you made a mistake. Sometimes it means someone else was already there, guiding you the wrong way. I went hiking alone because I needed distance from everything familiar. Work had been heavy for months. Sleep was short and restless. I picked a trail that was marked as moderate and rarely used, somewhere deep enough to feel quiet but not extreme. I planned a single-day hike. I packed light but careful. Water, food, first aid, headlamp, map, compass, extra socks, knife, phone, battery pack. I parked my car at a gravel turnout just after sunrise. The air smelled wet and clean. The forest was thick with tall trees and heavy shadows. The trailhead sign was old but readable. I checked the time and started walking. The first hours felt calm. The ground was soft with pine needles. Birds moved through the branches. The trail was narrow but clear. I paid attention to my steps and pace. I drank water often. I felt present and alert. Around late morning, the trail split. One path looked more worn. The other looked less used but still marked on the map. I checked the map again. The less used path cut across a ridge and shortened the loop. I chose it. As soon as I took that path, the forest changed. The trees grew closer together. The light faded. The ground turned uneven with exposed roots and rocks. I noticed fewer signs of people. No footprints. No trash. No cut branches. I kept going because everything still matched the map. I marked trees in my head. Bent branch. Large boulder. Fallen log. About an hour later, I realized something felt off. The trail markers were farther apart. The ground showed signs of washout. Small landslides had erased parts of the path. I stopped and checked the map again. According to the map, I should have been near a creek. I heard water, but it sounded farther away than expected. I walked downhill carefully and reached the creek. The water was higher than normal, fast and cold. The crossing marked on the map was gone. The bank on the other side was steep and slick. I stood there longer than I should have. I felt irritation first, then concern. I looked for another crossing upstream and downstream. Nothing safe. I decided to turn back and return the same way. That was when the forest started to feel wrong. As I walked back, the trail looked different. The bent branch was gone. The fallen log was not where I remembered it. I told myself I was tired. I kept walking. The light shifted as clouds moved in. The temperature dropped. Wind moved through the trees in uneven waves. I felt watched without any reason to justify it. I reached a section where the trail vanished completely. No clear path, just brush and trees. I stood still and listened. The forest was quiet in a way that felt heavy. I checked the compass. Pointed northeast. According to the map, I should go west. I adjusted and moved slowly, pushing through undergrowth, trying to find the trail again. I slipped on wet leaves and scraped my leg on a rock. Blood soaked my sock. I cleaned it and wrapped it tight. Time felt strange. I checked my watch often. The afternoon disappeared faster than it should have. The sky darkened early under thick cloud cover. I finally found a trail again. Relief hit me hard. I followed it quickly, not caring about pace anymore. My breathing was heavy. My pack felt heavier than before. The trail led downhill steeply. That did not match the map. I stopped and checked again. I realized then that I was not on the marked trail anymore. I was on something else. A path made by animals or by people who did not want it to be found. I debated turning back, but fear pushed me forward. I thought downhill would lead to water or a road. I was wrong. The trail ended at a small clearing with signs of human activity. Not camping. Not hiking. Cut trees stacked poorly. Old fire pits. Trash buried shallow in the dirt. This place felt hidden on purpose. I felt a deep cold fear that had nothing to do with the weather. I backed away slowly. My foot snapped a branch. The sound felt too loud. I froze and listened. I heard movement far away. Heavy steps not matching animals. I did not wait to confirm. I turned and moved fast, not running but steady and hard. The forest closed in. Branches scratched my arms and face. I stopped checking the map. I focused on direction only. I kept moving uphill now, pushing toward higher ground. My legs burned. My lungs hurt. My head throbbed. I almost tripped several times. Near dusk, I reached a ridge. I could see through the trees and spotted something gray in the distance. Road. I forced myself to keep going. My body felt close to shutting down. When I reached the road, my knees nearly gave out. It was a narrow service road, but it was real and open. I followed it until night fell. Headlamp on. Every sound behind me made my heart jump. I did not stop until I saw my car parked alone under the trees. I unlocked it and got inside. My hands shook so badly I had trouble starting the engine. When it finally started, I locked the doors and sat there breathing until my head cleared. I drove out slowly. I did not feel safe until I reached the main highway. When I got home, I cleaned my wounds and slept without dreams. Days later, I looked up that trail. The shorter loop did not exist anymore. It had been closed years ago after people went missing near unmarked paths. I still hike, but I never go alone now. I stay on trails that are used and maintained. I pay attention to signs that feel small at first. The forest does not need anything unreal to be dangerous. It only needs silence, distance, and one wrong decision. I went hiking alone on a random weekday because I needed quiet and space. Work had been heavy and my sleep was bad. I picked a trail I had never walked before because it looked empty on the map and the reviews said it was simple. The trailhead was a small dirt pull-off beside a forest road. No signs of recent use. The air smelled wet and cold. Pine needles covered the ground and soaked my boots right away. I checked my pack twice before leaving the car. Water, food, first aid, map, compass, headlamp, knife, extra socks. I locked the car and started walking without rushing. The trail began wide and clear. Tall trees blocked most of the light. The ground felt soft and uneven. Every step made a dull sound. I noticed old footprints pressed into the mud, but they were faded. I kept a steady pace and focused on my breathing. After the first hour, the trail narrowed. Branches brushed my arms. The map showed a loop that would bring me back to the road by late afternoon. I trusted the map more than my phone since there was no signal. As I climbed higher, the weather shifted. Clouds moved in and the light dropped fast. The forest felt tighter and quieter. No birds, no wind. I stopped to drink water and noticed the trail markers were harder to see. Some were missing. Others were placed low on trees like someone wanted them hidden. I followed them anyway because the ground still looked worn. I told myself this was normal on less used trails. After another hour, I reached a small clearing. The ground was torn up and there were cut branches stacked in piles. Not old piles. The wood was fresh and sticky. I smelled fuel and metal. My stomach tightened. This was not on the map. I moved slowly and scanned the area. No voices. No engines. I decided to keep moving but changed direction slightly to avoid the clearing. The trail faded into nothing. Leaves covered everything. I stopped and checked the compass. The needle pointed steady, but the direction did not match the map. I walked downhill to find water because trails often follow streams. After 10 minutes, I found a narrow creek. The water was cloudy and fast. I followed it hoping it would lead to a wider path. The ground near the creek was slick. My boots slipped and my ankle twisted hard. Pain shot up my leg and I fell into the mud. I sat there breathing slow until the pain settled into a deep ache. I wrapped my ankle tight and tested my weight. I could walk but slow. I knew staying calm mattered more than speed. I kept following the creek. The light kept dropping. The forest grew darker and colder. My hands went numb. I felt watched even though I saw nothing. That feeling came from knowing I was out of place and injured. I heard a low mechanical hum far away. It was steady and wrong for the forest. I moved off the creek and crouched behind a fallen log. I waited a long time. The sound came closer then stopped. I smelled chemicals and wet soil. I realized I might be near an illegal grow site or some hidden operation. That scared me more than being lost. I did not want to be seen. I changed direction again and climbed uphill despite the pain. Every step burned. I focused on small goals. 10 steps, then rest. The ground turned rocky. My hands scraped against sharp stone. My breath came out white. I checked the time. Late afternoon was gone. Night was close. I found an old service road by chance. It was overgrown but clear enough to follow. Tire marks showed recent use. That confirmed my fear but also gave me a way out. Roads lead somewhere. I followed it away from the hum. The road bent and dropped fast. My ankle throbbed but held. Darkness came quick. I used my headlamp and kept moving. The forest opened up and I heard wind again. After what felt like hours, I saw a faint glow through the trees. A road. A real paved road. I stepped out and felt relief hit my chest so hard it almost hurt. No cars passed for a long time. I walked along the shoulder until I recognized a bend from earlier that day. I reached my car well after dark. I unlocked it with shaking hands and sat inside with the heater blasting. I checked my ankle again. Swollen but not broken. I drank water and ate without tasting it. I stayed there a long time before driving. I did not report what I found. I did not go back to that trail. The ending was simple and clear to me. I made it out because I stayed calm and moved with purpose. I learned that maps can be wrong and silence can hide real danger. I drive past that forest sometimes and feel the ache in my ankle even now. It reminds me that being alone in the woods is not peaceful by default. It is honest and it does not care if you are ready. I went hiking alone because I needed space from everything. Work was piling up, my sleep was bad, and my head felt full all the time. Hiking had always helped with that. I picked a long trail that cut through dense hills and forest. Nothing famous, nothing busy, just a marked route on an old park map. I drove there early in the morning, parked at a gravel lot with only one other car, and started walking just after sunrise. The air was cold and damp. The ground smelled like wet dirt and leaves. The trail started wide and clear, packed dirt with rocks pressed down from years of boots. I felt calm at first. My breathing settled into a steady rhythm. I focused on the sound of my boots, the birds moving in the trees, the wind brushing through branches. Everything felt normal and solid. After about an hour, the trail narrowed. The trees grew closer together and blocked more light. The markers were still there, faded paint on trees and small wooden posts near bends. I checked my map a few times. Everything matched. I drank water, ate a granola bar, and kept moving. The first strange thing I noticed was how quiet it became. Not sudden silence, but a slow fading. Fewer birds, less wind. Even my footsteps sounded dull, like the forest was swallowing sound. I told myself it was normal. Forests change. Terrain changes. I kept going. The trail started to look less used. Grass pushed through the center. Branches leaned into the path. Some markers looked newer than others, like someone had replaced them recently, but not neatly. A few were crooked or set too low. I paid attention but did not turn back. I felt capable. I felt sure of myself. Around midday, I reached a fork that was not on my map. One path went downhill, narrow and dark. The other climbed up and looked more open. There was a marker pointing uphill, painted in the same faded color as the others. I followed it. As I climbed, the ground became rocky and uneven. My legs burned. Sweat soaked through my shirt. I stopped often to rest and drink. When I looked back down the trail, I could not see far. The path curved and vanished quickly. Trees blocked everything else. At the top, the trail leveled out, but it did not open like I expected. The forest stayed tight. The ground was covered in thick leaves, and the path became hard to see. I started watching for markers more closely. That was when I realized I had not seen one in a while. I stopped walking and stood still. I listened. Nothing moved. No birds. No insects. I felt a tight pressure in my chest. I checked my phone. No signal. The time showed I had been hiking longer than planned. I turned around, trying to follow my footprints, but the leaves made that impossible. I walked back the way I thought I came. After 10 minutes, the trail split again. This fork looked familiar but also wrong. The trees were closer. The ground was disturbed, like someone had walked back and forth many times. One marker was nailed into a tree at chest height, pointing left. Another marker lay on the ground, broken. I felt a deep sense of unease. Not fear yet, but awareness, like being watched without seeing anyone. I stayed calm and chose the path that felt more open. My steps became faster. My breathing became louder. The trail kept looping. I recognized rocks, fallen logs, bends in the path. I passed the same tree with a long scratch on its bark 3 times. Each time, I felt more panic rise in my throat. This was not just being lost. This was something wrong with the trail itself. My water bottle was half empty. My legs felt heavy. The forest felt closer, tighter. Light barely reached the ground now. I tried to force myself to stop and think, but my thoughts kept sliding into fear. I decided to move downhill no matter what the trail said. Down usually leads somewhere. I left the path and pushed through brush. Branches scraped my arms. My pants tore on thorns. The ground sloped sharply, loose dirt and rocks sliding under my boots. I fell once and hit my knee hard. The pain was sharp and grounding. Blood soaked through my pant leg. Eventually, the slope eased. I kept moving. I followed the sound of water, faint but real. When I reached a stream, I felt relief so strong it almost made me cry. Water meant direction. Water meant life. I followed it downstream. Hours passed. The light shifted toward evening. My body ached everywhere. My mouth was dry. I refilled my bottle from the stream and filtered it. I forced myself to keep going even when my legs shook. Near sunset, I heard a distant road. It was faint but steady. I pushed harder, ignoring the pain. The forest slowly thinned. The ground flattened. Then I broke through the trees and saw asphalt. I collapsed at the edge of the road and lay there breathing hard. A ranger truck stopped minutes later. They helped me up and gave me water. They said I had crossed into an unmaintained section of land where old trails overlapped and markers were often moved by people who should not have been there. I was taken back to my car after dark. I drove home in silence, hands shaking on the wheel. Even now, what stays with me is not just being lost. It is the feeling that the trail did not want to let me go, that the forest did not care if I made it out. I still hike, but never alone, and never without turning back the moment something feels wrong. I went hiking alone on a random weekday because I had time off work and my head felt full. I picked a long trail I had never finished before. It was not famous. It was one of those routes people talk about online and say it is quiet and peaceful. I drove out early in the morning while it was still cool. The parking area was empty except for one old truck that looked like it had not moved in days. I did not think much about it. People leave vehicles overnight all the time. The trail started easy. Packed dirt, clear path, trees spread out enough to let light through. I walked slow and steady. I always hike like that. I stop often. I look at the ground. I listen. I like to feel aware of where I am. After about an hour, the trail narrowed and the trees grew closer. The air felt heavier. The ground turned uneven with loose rocks and dry leaves hiding holes. I checked my phone and saw I had no signal. That was expected. I kept moving. A few miles in, the trail markings became harder to spot. The paint on the trees was faded. Some posts leaned or were half buried. I had to pay attention to every turn. I told myself this was part of the hike. This was what I wanted. Quiet and effort. I drank water and ate a small snack and kept going. Around midday, the weather changed fast. Clouds moved in and blocked the sun. The light went flat and gray. The forest felt deeper even though I had not gone far on the map. I reached a split in the trail that was not marked on my map. One path went downhill toward thicker trees. The other climbed over rock and brush. I chose the uphill path because it looked more used. That choice followed me for the rest of the day. The climb was hard. Loose stones slid under my boots. My legs burned. Sweat soaked my shirt. I had to stop often to catch my breath. When I finally reached the top, the trail faded into broken ground. No clear path, just signs of foot traffic and bent grass. I kept moving forward, trying to find the next marker. I did not find one. I walked for another hour thinking I would reconnect with the main trail. Instead, the ground dropped suddenly into a shallow ravine. The sides were steep and covered in loose dirt. I slipped going down and scraped my arm. It bled more than I expected. I wrapped it and kept moving, but now I was careful with every step. That was when I realized how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, just my breathing and the sound of my boots. I stopped and listened. Nothing else. The forest felt closed around me. Not scary in a dramatic way, but heavy, like being underwater. I checked my water. I had used more than planned. I turned around to head back the way I came. The climb back up the ravine was harder than going down. The dirt crumbled under my weight. I had to use my hands and knees. When I reached the top, I could not recognize the ground. Everything looked the same. Trees, rocks, brush. No clear direction. I walked slowly, trying to retrace my steps. After a while, I knew I was not on the same line anymore. Panic tried to creep in. I forced myself to stop and sit. I drank a small amount of water and ate the last of my food. I focused on staying calm. The sky grew darker. Started to rain lightly. The dirt turned slick. I knew I could not keep wandering. I needed a direction. I remembered the ravine and followed it downhill, hoping it would lead to a larger water path. After a long walk, it did. A shallow stream cut through the forest. I followed it, slipping on wet rocks, soaking my boots. Hours passed. My legs shook with every step. My arm throbbed. The rain stopped, but the air stayed cold. Late in the afternoon, I heard a distant sound that did not belong to the forest. A low engine noise came and went. I followed it, pushing through brush, ignoring scratches and pain. Eventually, the trees thinned. I saw a dirt road. It was narrow and overgrown, but it was a road. I stepped onto it and felt relief hit my whole body. I walked along it until I saw the old truck from the morning. It was parked near a small clearing. Not abandoned, just hidden by trees. I waited there until a ranger drove by before dark. I did not need rescue by then. I just needed a ride back to my car. I was dehydrated, exhausted, and covered in cuts, but I was safe. That hike stayed with me, not because of fear in the moment, but because of how easy it was to make one wrong choice and slowly lose control of the day. I still hike. I still go alone sometimes, but I respect the trail now in a deeper way. I plan better. I turn back sooner. I never forget how quiet it can get when you go just a little too far. I went hiking alone because I needed quiet and movement after weeks of sitting inside. The plan was simple: a long loop trail in a remote state forest that I had not visited before. I packed light but careful. Water bladder full, extra bottle, headlamp, paper map, compass, first aid kit, knife, food for a full day. Weather looked stable, cool morning and dry air. I parked at a small gravel lot with room for 6 cars. Mine was the only one there. The trailhead sign was old wood with faded letters. The map on it showed a loop with 2 ridges and a creek crossing. I took a photo of it and started walking. The forest was thick with tall pines and low brush. The ground was soft with needles and damp soil. The air smelled clean and cold. The trail was narrow but clear. Fresh boot prints showed that others used it sometimes. I felt calm and focused. My steps settled into a steady rhythm. After the first hour, I climbed the ridge. The slope was long and steady. Sweat soaked my shirt even in the cool air. I stopped at the top and drank water. I could see rolling forest in every direction. No roads, no houses, just green and gray and distance. On the far side of the ridge, the trail dropped fast. Loose dirt and rocks made me careful. I slowed down and used my poles. Near the bottom, I crossed the creek. Water was clear and cold. I filled my bottle through a filter and sat for a while. Time felt slow in a good way. I checked the map and compass. Everything matched. I started the second climb. That was when small things began to feel wrong. The trail narrowed more than expected. Blazes on trees were spaced farther apart. I kept moving because the path was still there. The forest changed. Pines gave way to mixed trees and thick undergrowth. The ground became uneven with fallen branches and old stumps. I watched my footing and pushed on. After another hour, I reached a flat section that should have been near the top of the second ridge. I expected a junction marked on the map. I did not see it. I walked forward and back to be sure. No signpost, no clear turn, just a faint path that continued straight. I checked my map again. I checked my compass. The direction felt off. I told myself that old maps can be wrong. I chose to continue straight, thinking I would reconnect with the loop soon. The path slowly faded. It became a suggestion instead of a trail. I saw cut branches that looked old. I followed them. The forest grew quieter. No birds, no wind, just my breathing and the sound of my steps. I felt a tight feeling in my chest that had nothing to do with effort. I stopped and stood still. I listened. Nothing moved. I decided to turn back. When I tried, the way I came from did not look the same. Everything looked similar. Trees with the same bark. Rocks with the same moss. I picked a direction that felt right and walked. After 10 minutes, I reached a shallow ravine that was not on the map. I checked the compass again. It showed I had drifted far east. That should not have happened. I corrected my course and moved west. The ground dropped again. I slipped on wet leaves and fell hard. Pain shot through my ankle. I lay still and waited. The pain settled into a deep ache. I tested my foot. It held weight but felt weak. I wrapped it tight and moved slower. Late afternoon light filtered through the trees. I knew I needed to find the main trail or prepare to stay out overnight. I rationed water. I ate slowly. I marked trees with small pieces of bright tape from my kit. I moved carefully and checked the compass every few minutes. Then I smelled something sharp and chemical. Not rot. Not animals. It made my nose sting. I slowed down. Ahead I saw straight lines that did not belong. Cut saplings. Plastic tubing on the ground. I stopped and crouched. I realized I had walked into an illegal grow site. Rows of disturbed soil. Black fabric. Buckets. The place was quiet, but active signs were everywhere. Fresh footprints. Recently cut plants. Fear changed my body. My hands shook. My mouth went dry. I backed away slowly. I did not want to be seen. I moved downhill to put distance between me and that place. I stayed off any clear path. I used thick brush for cover. My ankle throbbed, but I kept going. The forest dropped into a drainage. The ground was wet and uneven. Light faded fast. I knew I could not move safely in the dark with my ankle. I found a spot under a fallen tree and set up a small shelter. I did not use my headlamp much. I ate cold food. I drank small sips. I stayed still and listened for hours. I heard distant sounds that could have been animals or people. I did not know. I did not sleep much. At first light, I packed fast. I moved again, keeping low and quiet. I followed the drainage downhill. Water leads somewhere. After hours of slow walking, I heard a distant sound that did not belong to the forest. A faint hum. I followed it. The ground leveled. The trees thinned. I found a dirt road. I did not step onto it right away. I listened. I watched. When nothing moved, I crossed and followed it downhill. After a long walk, I reached the gravel lot. My car sat alone where I left it. Relief hit me hard. My hands shook again, this time from release. I unlocked the car and sat inside for a long time before driving. Later, after medical care and rest, I reported the site to authorities. They took it seriously. The ankle healed. What stayed with me was how fast a normal hike turned into survival. A map and good weather did not protect me from getting lost or from walking into something dangerous made by people. The ending was clear and real. I made it out by slowing down, using basic skills, and leaving the wild exactly when it stopped being safe. I went on the hike because I needed space from people and noise. Work had been heavy for months and my sleep was thin and broken. I chose a long trail that cut through hills and thick forest. It was marked on a paper map I bought at a small outdoor store weeks earlier. The weather report showed clear days and cold nights. I packed light but careful. Water filter, headlamp, extra socks, dry food, a small tent, compass, a phone with a weak signal that I did not plan to trust. I parked at a gravel lot just after sunrise and started walking before the air warmed up. The trail was narrow and packed down by boots. Pine needles covered the dirt and made the ground quiet under my steps. The forest smelled wet and clean. I followed the signs and the map and kept a steady pace. I counted my breaths and steps and felt my shoulders loosen. Hours passed like that. I crossed a creek on stones and climbed a long slope where the trees thinned. From the ridge, I could see a wide stretch of forest with layers of green fading into gray. I ate slowly and drank water and felt calm. In the afternoon, the trail changed. The ground turned rocky and the markers were farther apart. A storm had passed through recently. Fallen branches lay across the path. In one place, the trail dipped into a narrow valley where the soil had slid. The track was faint but still there. I checked the map and compass and kept going. The light shifted as clouds moved in. The forest grew darker earlier than expected. I noticed footprints that were not mine. They were deep and uneven. Heavy boots. They cut across the trail and went uphill. I did not think much of it. This was public land. People hike here. Still, I felt a tightness in my chest that did not fade. I walked on and told myself to focus on the path. Near evening, I realized I had gone too far. The map showed a junction that I had not seen. I stopped and turned in a slow circle. The forest looked the same in every direction. Trees close together. Moss on rocks. No clear sign. I backtracked, but the ground looked different from the angle I came. The light dropped fast. I felt the cold creep up from the soil into my boots. I made a choice to set camp where I was. It was safer than pushing on in low light. I cleared a small spot and set the tent. I ate without appetite. The forest sounds grew louder after dark. Wind in branches. Small animals moving. I lay still and listened. At some point I heard steps that were not small. Slow and careful. They circled wide. I held my breath and waited. The steps stopped. Time stretched. Nothing touched the tent. The steps faded. I did not sleep much. At first light I packed fast and moved uphill to get a view. From a rocky outcrop I saw the shape of a trail cut below me. It was not the one on my map. It looked used. I followed it down. The path led to a clearing with old equipment rusting near trees. Traps lay hidden under leaves. I understood then why the footprints were heavy. This was not a hiking route. I felt exposed. I turned back and moved fast. My legs burned. I kept checking behind me. The forest felt closer now. Branches snagged my pack. I crossed the creek again, but farther upstream. The water was cold and numbed my feet. I climbed out and kept going until my chest hurt. At midday, I found the real junction I had missed. The sign was broken and lying in brush. Relief hit me hard and made me weak. The way back was long but clear. The trail widened and the ground was packed again. I did not stop until I reached the gravel lot. My car sat alone. I dropped my pack and leaned against the door and breathed. I checked my arms and legs for cuts and ticks. I drank the last of my water and felt steady again. I drove away as the sun lowered. On the road, I thought about the choices I made. The small signs I ignored. The map that was right but incomplete. I learned that trails change and people use the land for reasons you do not expect. I learned that stopping early can be safer than pushing on. The ending was clear to me as the forest fell behind in the mirror. I got out on my own feet. I kept my calm. I went home. I went hiking alone because I needed quiet and movement and a reason to be tired at the end of the day. I picked a long trail that cut through a state forest I had visited once years ago. It was late summer. The air was warm but not heavy. The sky was clear when I parked my car at the gravel lot near the trailhead. I packed water, food, a map, a headlamp, and a small first aid kit. I checked my boots and tightened the laces. I locked the car and started walking with a steady pace. The first miles felt easy. The trail was narrow and packed dirt with roots crossing it like veins. Pine needles covered the ground and softened each step. The forest smelled dry and sharp. Sunlight came down in wide strips through the trees. I followed the trail markers without thinking. My breathing settled into a slow rhythm. Sweat built under my pack straps and soaked my shirt. I drank water at regular points and kept moving. After a while, the trail split. The map showed a loop, but the sign at the split was old and faded. I chose the left path because it looked more used. The ground sloped downward and the trees grew closer together. The light dimmed. The air felt cooler. I heard water somewhere below but could not see it. I walked for another hour and noticed that the trail markers were farther apart. Some were missing. I slowed down and checked the map again. The map did not match what I saw around me. The path curved more than it should have. I stopped and listened. No wind, no animals, just my own breathing and the sound of my boots on dirt. I told myself the map might be outdated. I kept going. The trail narrowed into a thin line through brush. Branches scratched my arms. The ground turned rocky and uneven. I rolled my ankle once and caught myself before falling. I sat on a rock and rested. I drank more water. I ate a bar and looked around. The forest felt the same in every direction. Tall trees, thick undergrowth, no clear landmarks. I stood up and decided to turn back. I followed my footprints for a short distance but lost them where the ground turned to stone. I walked back toward where I thought the split was. Time passed without signs of it. The light shifted. The sun moved lower. The air cooled more. I felt a tight pressure in my chest that had nothing to do with the hike. I stopped again and forced myself to slow down. Rushing would make it worse. I checked my phone. No signal. The battery was already low from using the map earlier. I turned it off. I looked at my compass and picked a direction that should lead toward the main trail. I moved carefully, stepping around loose stones and pushing through brush. My legs burned. My ankle throbbed. I focused on steady steps and steady breathing. An hour later, I reached a shallow ravine with a trickle of water. I knelt and filled my bottle through a filter. The water was cold and clear. I drank until my hands stopped shaking. I washed my face. The sound of water helped me think. I decided to follow the ravine downhill. Water usually led somewhere. The slope was steep and slick with moss. I slipped twice and caught myself on trees. My pack shifted and pulled at my shoulders. As the light faded, the forest grew quiet in a way that felt heavy. I kept moving. I did not stop to sit. I did not stop to think about how far I had come. I focused on the ground ahead and the sound of water. The ravine widened and the trickle became a stream. The banks opened up and the trees thinned. I saw signs of old foot traffic along the water. Flattened grass. A cut log. I followed the stream until it crossed a wider path. The path was clear and worn. It had fresh markers. Relief hit me hard and fast. I sat down on the edge of the path and let my hands rest on the dirt. I checked my ankle and wrapped it tight. I ate the last of my food. I waited until my breathing slowed. I followed the path with care. The headlamp came on as the light failed. The beam cut a narrow tunnel through the dark. The forest looked different at night. Shapes pressed close. Sounds felt louder. I stayed focused on the trail and the markers. The path climbed and then leveled out. After a long stretch, I smelled smoke and then saw a glow ahead. It was a small ranger station near the edge of the forest. The lights were on. I did not run. I walked steady and straight until I reached the building. I spent the night there after explaining my situation through notes and gestures without words. My ankle was swollen but not broken. In the morning, the ranger drove me back to my car. The parking lot looked ordinary and calm. My car started on the first try. I sat behind the wheel for a long time before leaving. The hike ended with me driving home on sore legs and a clear mind. I learned how fast familiar ground can turn confusing. I learned how easy it is to trust a choice without checking it twice. I also learned that patience and slow decisions matter when things go wrong. I still hike. I still go alone sometimes. I carry better maps now. I leave more time. I pay closer attention to the land under my feet. I went hiking alone because I needed quiet and distance from everything that felt heavy at home. Work had turned into the same days over and over. Sleep was short and shallow. I picked a long forest trail that cut through hills and old logging land. It was not famous. It did not show up in many travel posts. That was the point. I packed light but careful. Water, food, a map printed on paper, a small compass, a flashlight, spare socks, a first aid kit, and my phone on airplane mode to save battery. I parked my car near a faded sign that listed trail rules and distances. The letters were worn and some were missing. The forest started close to the road and swallowed sound fast. Once I stepped past the first line of trees, the air felt cooler and damp. The trail was narrow and packed with dirt and pine needles. Roots crossed it like veins. The ground was soft in places and hard in others. I could smell wet leaves and old wood. Every step felt steady at first. I followed the map and the trail markers tied to trees. They were old strips of faded cloth and paint marks. I kept a slow pace. I wanted the hike to last. Birds moved above me, but I could not see them clearly. Wind brushed the tops of the trees, but did not reach the ground much. After an hour, the trail climbed. My legs burned in a good way. Sweat soaked my shirt and cooled me when I stopped. The deeper I went, the less clear the trail became. Grass grew taller in the middle. Fallen branches lay across it. I stepped over them and around them. I checked the map again and matched the shape of the hills around me. Everything seemed right. I passed an old fire ring filled with rainwater and leaves. No fresh signs of people. That made me feel calm and alert at the same time. I liked being alone, but I knew what that meant if something went wrong. Around midday, I reached a ridge. Trees opened up and I could see far into the forest. Layers of green rolled away in every direction. I sat on a rock and ate slowly. I drank water and listened. No engines. No voices. Just wind and insects. I felt small but steady. When I stood up again, I noticed the trail marker ahead looked newer than the others. The cloth was brighter. I thought it was strange, but not enough to turn back. I followed it. The trail narrowed more and dipped into a shallow valley. The ground turned muddy. My boots sank slightly. I left clear prints. That detail stayed in my mind. I crossed a small stream by stepping on stones and logs. On the other side, the trail split without a sign. The map showed only one path. I picked the one that looked more used. After another stretch, I noticed something off. The forest felt tighter. Trees grew closer together. Light faded even though the sun should have been high. I checked my phone time. It was still early afternoon. I decided to turn back to the ridge and recheck my route. When I reached the stream again, I saw my footprints on the mud going in but none coming out. That stopped me cold. I knew water could wash marks away, but the ground was still wet enough to hold shape. I scanned the area. I found the log I used. It was there. The stones were there, but the prints were gone. I felt a slow, tight feeling in my chest. I took a breath and forced myself to stay focused. I followed the stream upstream for a short distance to find a clearer crossing. I crossed again and marked a tree with a small cut from my knife so I would recognize it. I walked back toward the ridge. The trail did not look the same. Branches blocked parts that were open before. I pushed through brush and scratched my arms. The forest felt silent in a heavy way. No birds now. No insects. Only my breathing and the sound of my steps. After a while, I realized I had been walking downhill when I should have been climbing. Panic tried to rush in. I stopped and sat on a fallen tree. I drank water and ate even though I did not feel hungry. I looked at the map again and used the compass. I adjusted my direction and started moving slow and careful. Every few steps I looked back and memorized shapes of trees and rocks. I found an old logging road covered in grass. That gave me hope. Roads lead somewhere. I followed it. The ground was uneven and full of holes. My ankle twisted once but held. As I walked, I noticed deep marks in the dirt that were not mine. Heavy boot prints. Fresh. They went the same way. That made me uneasy. I did not want to meet anyone this far out. I slowed down and stayed to the side of the road. The light started to change. Shadows stretched longer. I knew I was running out of time. I stayed on the road and ignored side paths. My legs felt weak and my back ached. I kept moving. Finally, I heard a sound that cut through everything. A distant engine. It was faint but real. I walked toward it. The road widened and turned to gravel. Then I saw a metal gate and beyond it a paved road. I stepped out of the forest and stood there breathing hard. My clothes were torn and dirty. My arms were scratched. I followed the road, and after a long walk, I saw my car parked far from where I thought I was. I unlocked it and sat inside without starting it right away. I drank the last of my water and let my hands stop shaking. I drove out as the sun dropped low. On the way home, I replayed every choice. I knew how close I came to being stuck overnight or worse. The forest did nothing wrong. It stayed the same. I was the one who pushed deeper without respect. I still hike now, but I plan shorter routes and turn back early. I tell myself the trail does not owe me a way out. When I reached home that night, I slept deep and heavy. The ending was clear to me. I walked out because I slowed down, paid attention, and accepted that being alone means being careful every second.